By Poseidon's trident, is this aether casa actually reaching anything beyond these rapidly shrinking shores? If you're picking up this signal, consider yourselves witnesses to the most spectacular and frankly inconvenient real estate disaster in history. You're tuned into the Atlantean Orolog, broadcasting live, or more accurately, submerging live, from the once magnificent, now utterly drenched city of Atlantis in the year, well, let's just say, the very last one. My name is Captain Lero, a humble Atlantean sailor, and if the sheer, impossible audacity of this transdimensional broadcast, from a moment when divine wrath meets shoddy geology, doesn't compel you to immediately smash that subscribe button and commit to witnessing ultimate hubris, then frankly, even the gods of the deep can't help your apathy. Do it now, before our crystal towers become fish food, and tell me if this peculiar connection holds. From what strange, dry corner of your world are you listening? What year has fate decreed for you, and what hour do these final, soggy tidings reach you? We're taking bets on how long the water reaches the citadel. Now, grab a life raft. Atlantis, the jewel of the oceans, they used to call us. And why wouldn't they? We were the city that had it all, a shining beacon of progress that probably blinded us to the very obvious cracks forming in our foundations, both literally and figuratively. We built towers of gleaming crystal that kissed the sky, so tall you could get a nosebleed just looking at them. Our architects were so proud they probably would have charged the gods rent for the airspace. We had flying chariots, you know, glorious silent machines that zipped through the air powered by crystals the size of a man's head. We'd race them through the city, dodging skyscrapers and probably the occasional stray seagull. It was a grand old time, filled with the kind of reckless confidence that only comes when you haven't been slapped in the face by a tidal wave yet. We thought we were invincible, an ocean as laughable now as a waterproof tea bag. Our mastery of the seas was, and I say this with a completely straight face, legendary. We built ships that could cross the globe in the blink of an eye, vessels that didn't just sail on the water but danced with it. Or so we thought. We had more gold than any mortal could ever count, mountains of it glistening in our vaults. We'd use it for everything, from paving our streets to making ridiculously oversized statues of our even more ridiculously oversized egos. We were so dripping in wealth, our treasury guards probably suffered from gold-plated boredom. We were the envy of the world, a kingdom built on brilliance and, let's be honest, a healthy dose of sheer, unadulterated arrogance. We truly believed we were the pinnacle of civilization, the final chapter in the Book of Greatness. Turns out the ocean had other ideas about who was truly in charge, and it was about to edit our grand narrative with a very large, very wet eraser. The heart of our city, the source of all our wondrous and slightly hazardous technology, was the Great Crystal, a colossal, pulsating gem that hummed with a power we barely understood, but were more than happy to exploit. It powered our homes, our vehicles, our ridiculous glowing statues, and probably even our king's unusually radiant smile. The priests and scientists, who were often the same people with different hats, would perform elaborate rituals around it, claiming to commune with its energy. Looking back, they were probably just guessing the password. This crystal was our pride and joy, the symbol of our superiority. We were so sure of its eternal benevolence we never bothered with a backup plan. A small oversight, you might say, on par with building a sandcastle during a hurricane. Life in Atlantis was a whirlwind of lavish parties and groundbreaking discoveries. One day you'd be attending a symposium on harnessing the energy of a captured sunbeam. The next you'd be at a banquet where the wine flowed from fountains and the fish practically jumped onto your plate, pre-seasoned. We had conquered diseases that plagued the rest of the world, and our lifespan was something other nations wrote epic poems about. We were so advanced, we probably considered boredom the most lethal of all ailments. Our society was a well-oiled machine, every citizen playing their part in the grand spectacle of Atlantean supremacy. We were the directors, actors, and audience of our own magnificent play, completely oblivious to the fact that the theater was actively sinking into the sea. The first signs of trouble were subtle, easy to ignore for a people so thoroughly convinced of their own perfection. A tremor here, a slightly higher tide there. The old soothsayers, bless their cryptic hearts, tried to warn us. They'd babble about the wrath of the sea and the anger of the earth. We, in our infinite wisdom, dismissed them as dramatic old fools who probably had too much fermented seaweed wine. We had seismic dampeners for Poseidon's sake. Our city was designed to withstand the temper tantrums of the planet, or so the blueprints claimed. The engineers, bless their slide rules, assured us everything was within acceptable parameters. A minor geological hiccup, they called it. It turned out to be less of a hiccup and more of a world-ending burst. Then came the day the waters began to rise in earnest. Not a gentle lapping at the shore, but a hungry, insistent surge that reclaimed our golden streets one by one. The lower districts, home to the fishermen and the dock workers, were the first to go. We in the upper echelons watched from our crystal towers, a morbid curiosity replacing our initial disbelief. The great sea walls, our supposed shield against the ocean's fury, were breached as if they were made of parchment. The cracks in the earth followed soon after, great gaping maws that swallowed entire city blocks whole. The symphony of our city turned into a cacophony of screams and crumbling stone. Our flying chariots were useless against the swirling vortex that our home was becoming. It was then, in the heart of the chaos, that the great crystal began to overload. The steady, comforting hum turned into a deafening, erratic shriek. Its brilliant light, once a symbol of our power, became a blinding, terrifying strobe. The very heart of Atlantis was having a catastrophic meltdown, and we, its brilliant creators, could do nothing but watch. The pride of our kingdom, the source of our invincibility, was now the catalyst for our complete and utter annihilation. The irony is so thick you could probably use it as a flotation device. Our advanced technology, our crystalline architecture, our vast wealth, none of it mattered. We were a kingdom drowning in our own hubris, a lesson the universe was teaching us with brutal, unforgiving efficiency. If this broadcast from a sinking city, this final gurgling testament to a forgotten splendor, has captivated you, then honor our memory. Don't let the tale of Atlantis be swallowed by the depths along with us. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that button like the waves are hitting our shores with relentless, unstoppable force. Let our glorious disaster serve as your entertainment, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall. Do it now, before this broadcast and everything it represents is lost to the crushing silence of the abyss. Subscribe and keep the legend of Atlantis alive, even as its last voice fades into the static of the sea. Before the world decided to take a bath and drag us down with it, there were whispers. Not the kind of whispers you hear in a lover's ear, mind you. These were the universe's equivalent of a passive-aggressive note left on the countertop. A strange tremor that would rattle the crystal goblets during a particularly pompous speech by a politician. A tide that crept just a little too high, licking at the gilded boots of the statues we built to honor ourselves. We were so in love with the sound of our own genius we never stopped to listen. The signs were there, plain as the nose on your face, but our collective nose was so high in the air we couldn't see past our own magnificent reflection in the polished marble floors. We were masters of creation, but utterly clueless students of consequence. The earth began to twitch, like a dog dreaming of chasing celestial rabbits. They weren't real quakes, not at first. The engineers, our high priests of logic and reason, called them subharmonic crustal adjustments. They had a fancy name for everything. They'd pat their seismic dampeners, those colossal pistons buried beneath the city, and assure everyone with a smug smile that our foundations were more stable than a politician's promise. They claimed the technology could withstand anything. It was a comforting lie, and we lapped it up. A minor shudder during breakfast was just an amusing little jiggle to settle the juice in your glass. It became a conversation starter at parties, a quaint little quirk of living on the most advanced and apparently most agitated piece of rock on the planet. Then the sea started acting up. Poseidon, or whoever was on duty that celestial shift, was clearly getting bored. The tides became erratic. One day the water would retreat so far you could walk out and see shipwrecks from forgotten ages, a boneyard of less ambitious sailors. The next, it would surge, not with anger but with a sullen, silent force, swallowing whole sections of the beach before politely receding as if nothing had happened. The harbour master's official log from the second Tuesday of the high tides read, "Unusual tidal activity. Recommend reinforcing the lower sea walls." The council's response? They formed a committee to debate the aesthetic impact of taller walls on the coastal skyline. We were more concerned with property values than prophecies. And oh, the prophecies. We had oracles, of course. Every self-respecting super-civilization does. Ours were a peculiar bunch, tucked away in steam-filled grottos, high on geothermal fumes and existential dread. They'd mumble about a divine imbalance and the sea's insatiable hunger. The high priest of the great crystal temple, a man whose ceremonial robes had more gold thread than a dragon's hoard, would listen patiently, nod sagely, and then go back to polishing the big glowing rock that powered the city. His official recommendation was to increase the weekly fish sacrifice, because obviously the gods who supposedly forged the cosmos were just feeling a bit peckish. We were trying to solve a spiritual crisis with a seafood buffet. The ruling council, our glorious leaders, treated the warnings with the kind of amused contempt usually reserved for a child's imaginary friend. I remember attending a public forum where a frantic geologist, a woman with wild eyes and even wilder data, tried to present her findings on the increasing frequency of the tremors. She was halfway through a chart showing an alarming spike in tectonic stress when the chairman of the council, a man so plump with wealth he practically orbited his own stomach, interrupted her. He joked that perhaps the city was simply vibrating with prosperity. The chamber erupted in laughter. The geologist was quietly escorted from the podium. We literally laughed in the face of our own extinction. But not everyone was laughing. You could feel it in the air, a low-frequency anxiety humming just beneath the city's polished veneer. The fishermen, men and women who knew the ocean not as a servant but as a fickle and powerful neighbor, started talking in hushed tones. They spoke of fish behaving strangely, of currents that pulled in unnatural directions, of a coldness in the water that had nothing to do with the seasons. My own crew, we'd feel it too, a sudden lurch of the ship in a dead calm sea, a fog that rolled in too quickly, smelling of ozone and something ancient and angry. We'd share a look, a silent acknowledgement that something was deeply, profoundly wrong. But what could we do? Yell at the sky? The sky wasn't listening, and the people in charge had their fingers in their ears. The priests warned us. The oracles mumbled. The geologists presented charts. But we were a society that had placed its faith entirely in the tangible, the measurable, the engineered. We had equations for everything, from the trajectory of our flying chariots to the optimal mineral content in our hydroponic gardens. But we had no equation for humility, no formula for dread. We saw the philosophers, the poets, the mystics, as quaint relics of a less enlightened time. They spoke of hubris, of cosmic balance, of the folly of mortals who think themselves gods. We mostly just told them to sacrifice more fish. Perhaps we should have sacrificed fewer engineers and more philosophers. At least the philosophers would have given us something profound to ponder as the water closed over our heads. The storms began to change. We were used to the ocean's fury. Our sea walls had weathered countless gales, but these were different. They'd brew out of a clear blue sky, dark and violent squalls that seemed to focus their rage directly on our city. The lightning wasn't just white or yellow. It was a sickly crystalline green, the color of the great crystal itself. It would strike the highest towers with surgical precision, not to destroy them, but almost as if it were trying to get their attention. The winds would howl not with the sound of air, but with something that sounded eerily like a chorus of mournful voices. The weather service, using all their advanced predictive models, would be baffled. Their reports became a string of apologies for unforeseen atmospheric phenomena. It was the planet's way of screaming, and we just kept hitting the snooze button. Even the sky, our last bastion of predictable beauty, began to play tricks on us. For 3 nights in a row, the aurora, usually a phenomenon of the frozen poles, danced directly above the capital, not in its usual gentle greens and pinks, but in furious, bloody reds and deep, bruised purples. Astronomers argued it was a rare alignment of solar winds and our city's own massive energy field. A beautiful anomaly, they called it, a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. But the old ones, the few who still remembered the ancient stories, saw it for what it was, a celestial shroud. The sky itself was mourning for a city that was already dead, just too stubborn to lie down. The vibrant coral reefs that fringed our island, a kaleidoscope of life we prided ourselves on preserving, began to bleach overnight. Not a slow, sad fading, but a sudden, stark whitening, as if the very color had been scared out of them. The birds that nested along the cliffs fell silent. Their morning songs, once a cheerful alarm clock for the coastal districts, were replaced by an unsettling quiet. It was a creeping, insidious decay, a subtle wrongness that our scientists couldn't quantify. They took samples, ran tests, and concluded it was all very puzzling. Meanwhile, the world around us was quietly and efficiently dying. Our king, Atlas the 27th, a man who inherited his crown but not an ounce of his ancestors' wisdom, decided the best way to address the growing public anxiety was to throw a festival. The Festival of Unshakable Faith, he called it. The irony was apparently lost on him. For a week the city was commanded to celebrate its own permanence. There were parades with floats depicting our greatest engineering marvels, street performers juggling glowing crystals, and free wine laced with something to make everyone feel, well, unshakable. It was a city-wide party on the deck of a sinking ship, a forced, frantic gaiety that felt more like a wake than a celebration. From the deck of my ship, the Wave Dancer, I watched the festival with a hollow feeling in my gut. While the aristocrats in their flying chariots toasted to Atlantis' eternal glory, we sailors were busy reinforcing the hull and checking the emergency rations. We saw the sea not as a backdrop for a party, but as a restless beast twitching in its sleep. We saw the green lightning and heard the wailing winds, and we knew in our bones that these weren't signs to be ignored. They were a final warning, a courtesy call from the abyss before it came to collect. The whispers were no longer whispers now. They were becoming insistent murmurs, conversations in the dark corners of taverns and marketplaces. People started noticing the little things, how the water from the public fountains tasted faintly of salt, even in the heart of the city, how the crystals that lit the streets would sometimes flicker and dim for a moment, plunging a whole avenue into a disorienting twilight, before flaring back to life. These were dismissed as infrastructure issues, minor glitches in the grand, perfect system. Maintenance requests were filed, memos were sent. No one wanted to connect the dots because the picture they were forming was terrifying. I heard a story about the chief oracle, an old woman named Lero. She broke protocol, burst into the council chambers unannounced, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't mumble or speak in riddles this time. She screamed. She screamed of a great crack in the world's foundation, of a wave that would swallow the sun, of a kingdom of pride brought low by the very power it sought to control. She begged them to listen, to evacuate, to appease the ancient powers they had forgotten. They had her sedated, declared her mentally unfit due to prolonged exposure to volcanic gases. It was easier to declare the messenger insane than to heed the message. The land itself grew sick. The great ancient trees in the royal gardens began to weep a thick black sap. The soil in the fertile plains surrounding the city became sour, and crops withered on the vine. Farmers who had for generations practiced a near-perfect science of agriculture were baffled. Their advanced irrigation systems delivered water, their nutrient injectors supplied minerals, but the land refused to give life. It was as if the earth itself had decided to go on strike, refusing to sustain the arrogant civilization that lived upon its surface. We were becoming a kingdom of brilliant minds starving on a dead rock. Then came the animal exodus. It started with the insects, a silent creeping departure, then the lizards, the small mammals, everything that could crawl or burrow. They moved as one, a silent, disciplined army fleeing a battle we couldn't yet see. They swarmed from the forests and fields, heading for the highest ground, an instinctual retreat from a coming flood. The citizens found it peculiar, a nuisance even. Pest control units were dispatched. No one asked the crucial question, what did the rats and the beetles know that our greatest scientists did not? Our arrogance was a national disease. It was taught in our schools, celebrated in our art, and enshrined in our laws. We were the people who had tamed the elements. We had built a paradise on earth. The idea that it could all be taken away was not just frightening, it was insulting. It was a direct contradiction of our entire worldview. To admit that we were in danger was to admit that we were not in control, and for a society built on the illusion of total control, that was an admission we were simply incapable of making. Denial was no longer just a psychological defense, it was our state religion. The great crystal, our beating heart, began to show its own signs of distress. The hum that had been the city's background noise for centuries developed an arrhythmia, a slight but perceptible skip in its rhythm. The scientists in the temple assured the public it was undergoing a reattunement cycle. They plastered over the growing hairline fractures in its casing with new alloys and declared it stronger than ever. They were like physicians telling a patient with a failing heart that all he needs is a new shirt. They polished the exterior while the core was spiraling into a catastrophic failure. The day before the end, we saw the final omen, a solar eclipse, unscheduled and unpredicted by any of our astronomers. For 9 minutes, in the middle of a bright afternoon, the sun vanished, blotted out by an unseen object. The city was plunged into an unnatural darkness, a cold, dead silence broken only by the panicked cries of those caught in the open. When the light returned, everything seemed dimmer. The world had been washed in a grey, foreboding light, as if the sun itself had witnessed our future and lost some of its will to shine. It was the universe turning down the lights before the final curtain call. And what did we do in the face of this terrifying, undeniable portent? The king, in his infinite wisdom, ordered the festival of unshakable faith to be extended for another day. He declared the eclipse a divine salute to our greatness, a sign that the heavens themselves were pausing to admire our works. The wine flowed even more freely. The music was louder, more frantic. It was the most spectacular, most desperate, most pathetic party in the history of the world. We danced and drank and cheered, while the gods sharpened their tridents and the earth prepared to open its maw. On the Wave Dancer, we didn't party. We secured the last of the cargo, said our quiet goodbyes to the city we saw from the harbor, and prepared to cast off on the morning tide, an unscheduled run carrying a private cargo for a wealthy merchant who, unlike the king, had seen the writing on the wall and was paying a king's ransom to get his family and his fortune out. The air was thick with a tension so palpable you could taste it, a metallic tang of fear. The other sailors were quiet, their faces grim. We were rats, but we were rats who knew a sinking ship when we saw one. That growing sense of unease was a crack in the mirror of our perfection. For centuries we had only seen our own reflection, beautiful, powerful, and eternal. But now other images were starting to bleed through. The frightened face of the oracle, the bleached dead coral, the dark weeping sap of the trees, the empty sky where the birds used to sing. The mirror was breaking, and the reality behind it was ugly, chaotic, and utterly indifferent to our accomplishments. Our invincibility was an illusion, and the first tremors were the sound of the glass beginning to shatter. We had forgotten the old ways. We had forgotten that the ocean was not a highway and the earth was not a foundation. They are living, breathing things with moods and tempers and a memory far longer than our fleeting history. We had forgotten that our crystals, our technology, our very lives were gifts, not entitlements. We took the generosity of the world and called it our own genius. We mistook its patience for submission. This was our greatest flaw, our fatal error. We were children playing with cosmic fire, and we were about to get burned. The signs were all there. The tremors, the tides, the prophecies, the silence of nature. 1,000 warnings, 1,000 chances to change course. We ignored every single one. We are the ultimate cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered on the ocean currents. Don't let our desperate cries fade into the waves. Don't let our story become just another ignored omen. If you want to hear the rest of our tragic, waterlogged saga, if you want to understand how a paradise can drown, then heed this warning. Subscribe, click that button and bear witness, do it, so that our folly might serve some purpose. so that our last broadcast does not become just another whisper lost in the storm. Subscribe now, before the static takes us completely. It happened on a Tuesday. Of course, it was a Tuesday. Nothing interesting ever happens on a Wednesday. The city was in the middle of its midday hum, the gentle thrum of 1,000 flying chariots weaving between crystal spires, the low buzz of the power conduits beneath the streets. I was on the Wave Dancer, docked in the Grand Harbor, mending a sail and listening to the city's heartbeat. Then the heartbeat skipped. Not just skipped, it went into a full-blown, gut-wrenching fibrillation. It wasn't like the gentle twitches we'd grown accustomed to. This was different. This was a statement. The entire island, our perfect engineered paradise, gave a violent, angry shudder, as if a colossal beast chained beneath us had finally snapped one of its bonds. First, the ground just rumbled, like a grumpy sea god stretching his legs after a millennium-long nap. It was a deep, resonant growl that you felt in your teeth before you heard it with your ears. Then came the jolt, a sudden, brutal upward thrust that threw men off their feet and sent unsecured cargo crashing across the decks. From the harbor, I watched the city bounce. The impossible, slender towers of the aristocrats swayed like drunken reeds in a gale. A shower of crystalline dust, maybe a few decorative gargoyles, rained down into the streets below. For a solid minute, the world lost its mind, shaking us like a child with a snow globe. The shaking stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a silence that was somehow louder and more terrifying than the chaos it replaced. The city stood, bruised but defiant. The initial shock gave way to a wave of nervous laughter and bravado. People picked themselves up, dusted off their tunics, and immediately started talking about the marvel of Atlantean engineering. "Did you see how the Citadel Tower swayed? Designed to do that, you know," they'd say with a tremor still in their voice. They were like a man who'd just been clipped by a speeding chariot, insisting he'd meant to dodge that way all along. Then we saw the cracks. They weren't just the little hairline fractures our maintenance crews were used to painting over. These were jagged, angry wounds in the city's skin. A long, dark gash ran right across the Grand Plaza, splitting the mosaic of the city's founding in two. The irony was so thick you could have quarried it. The Canal Grande, our main aquatic thoroughfare, had a new, unscheduled waterfall, where a section of its retaining wall had given way. Water, the very element we claimed to have mastered, was now pouring into the lower merchant district, a gentle preview of the main event. Panic for a moment tried to take hold. A real, honest-to-God's flutter of fear swept through the city. People ran from the swaying buildings, their faces pale. The usual serene confidence of the Atlantean citizen was replaced by a more primal, wide-eyed terror. It was a beautiful, fleeting moment of clarity. For about 5 minutes, we were no longer gods in waiting. We were just people, standing on a very unstable piece of rock, suddenly aware of our own fragility. But you know what they say about moments. They pass. And pass it did, thanks to the swift and brutally efficient machine of state-sponsored denial. Before the dust had even settled, the Royal Engineering Corps was on the scene. Hoverpods swarmed the damaged areas, their crews working with a practiced theatrical efficiency. They slapped crystalline patches over the cracks, erected temporary supports, and rerouted the flooding with impressive speed. The city's public address system, usually reserved for festival announcements and the King's birthday greetings, crackled to life. A calm, reassuring voice informed us that a minor seismic event had occurred, that the situation was entirely under control, and that our glorious city had once again proven its resilience. We patched the cracks, boasted about our resilience. Foolish, very foolish. He was just clearing his throat, apparently. The official narrative was that our seismic dampeners had absorbed 99% of the energy. The damage, they claimed, was superficial. It was a testament to our strength, a victory even. They organized a resilience parade for the very next day. We were going to celebrate how well we'd survived a warning shot. It's like throwing a party because the arrow from a hidden archer only grazed your ear. You don't celebrate. You find the archer and hope he doesn't have another arrow knocked. From the deck of my ship, it was a different story. We sailors have a healthy respect for things that can kill us, and the sea and the earth are at the very top of that list. We saw the jolt for what it was, a punch, a deliberate, calculated blow. While the city planners were busy with their temporary patches, we were checking our hull for stress fractures. While they were planning their parade, we were planning our escape route. The merchant who'd hired me to smuggle his family out? He doubled my fee, paid in solid gold right there on the dock. He wasn't buying the superficial damage story. The Great Crystal was, of course, the main concern. The High Priest appeared on public broadcast standing before the colossal gem, which was now pulsing with a slightly erratic, sickly green light. He spouted some nonsense about the crystal having harmonized the tectonic energy, channeling it safely into the planetary core. He made it sound like the island had just performed a successful act of civic acupuncture. He conveniently failed to mention the new web of fractures spreading across the crystal's surface like frozen lightning, a detail clearly visible to anyone who wasn't willfully blind. The people wanted to believe it. Oh, how they wanted to believe it. Believing the lie was so much easier than contemplating the alternative. The alternative was that our science was fallible, that our island wasn't a fortress, that we were adrift on a piece of rock in a vast, indifferent ocean that had just decided to remind us who was boss. So they applauded the priest, they cheered for the engineering corps, and they got their parade outfits ready. The cognitive dissonance was deafening. It was a city trying to drown out the rumbling of its own doom with the sound of its own applause. That first tremor changed something, though, deep down. The confidence was now brittle. The arrogance had a new, frantic edge. The smiles on the faces of the council members looked a little too wide, a little too fixed. It was the bluster of a gambler who's just lost a huge hand but is trying to pretend it was all part of his strategy. They were doubling down on their faith in themselves, because the thought of being wrong was more terrifying than the thought of being crushed or drowned. I watched them from the harbor, these masters of the universe, scurrying around to fix the cracks in their perfect facade. They were so focused on the aesthetics of survival, on making sure the city still looked invincible, that they missed the point entirely. The crack in the Grand Plaza wasn't just a structural problem, it was a message. A neatly written sentence in a language we had forgotten how to read. He had said, "You are temporary," and they just paved right over it. The minor flooding in the merchant district was another ignored lesson. The water didn't rage, it simply flowed. It filled the lower levels of the spice markets and the textile workshops with a quiet insistence. The shopkeepers were furious, not at the gods or the ground, but at the city for the slow drainage. They complained about lost revenue and damaged goods. They demanded compensation. They were treating a symptom of a world-ending disease as if it were a simple plumbing issue. The animal kingdom, however, was not so easily fooled. The birds didn't return after the quake. The strange exodus we had witnessed before now seemed like a stroke of genius. The dolphins, which usually played in the harbor, were gone. We sailors noticed. No one else seemed to. The city was too busy listening to the reassuring speeches of its leaders to notice the profound, unnerving silence of the world around it. It was like living in a house where all the smoke detectors had been disabled because the beeping was annoying. The engineers became the heroes of the hour. They were lauded, celebrated, given medals. They had, after all, built a city that could withstand a nudge from a god's fist. They gave interviews explaining the complex interplay of alloys and energy fields that kept Atlantis safe. They were brilliant men, no doubt, but they were brilliant men staring at a single tree, completely oblivious to the fact that the entire forest was on fire and a tidal wave was coming to put it out. Their genius was a very specific, very narrow kind of blindness. I saw the fear in the eyes of the other sailors. These were tough, seasoned men who had faced down krakens and weathered storms that would turn a landsman's bones to jelly. But this was different. You can't fight an earthquake. You can't outrun a crack in the earth. You can only float. And we were all acutely aware that our little wooden ship was a much better bet than the giant sinking stone one it was tied to. The tremor had shaken the arrogance out of us, at least. The king's address that evening was a masterpiece of condescending reassurance. He spoke from his crystalline palace, the newly patched crack in the wall behind him carefully kept out of the broadcast's frame. He called the Atlanteans a chosen people and the tremor a test of our resolve, a test we had passed with flying colors, apparently. He announced a tax break for any businesses affected by the recent inconvenience. He was trying to put a financial bandage on a metaphysical wound. The sounds from the city that night were strange. The usual confident hum was gone. It was replaced by the frantic noise of reconstruction, the high-pitched whine of crystal saws, and the clang of hammers on metal. But underneath it, if you listened closely, you could hear something else, a new vibration. The earth wasn't settling, it was humming. It was a low predatory purr. The beast wasn't done stretching, it was getting ready to pounce. And the cracks were more than just physical. The tremor opened up fissures in our society. The rich, in their lofty towers that had swayed but stood, felt vindicated in their superiority. The poor in the lower districts, where the walls had cracked and the water had flowed, felt the first cold touch of real fear and resentment. The illusion of a unified, perfect society began to crumble long before the buildings did. The earthquake didn't just shake our foundations, it exposed them. I remember talking to an old fisherman on the docks that night. He wasn't looking at the frantic repairs in the city, he was looking out at the horizon, at the sea, which was unnaturally flat and still, like a sheet of black glass. He just shook his head. "She's holding her breath," he said. "When the sea holds her breath, she's either about to scream or about to swallow you whole." He knew, we all knew, the people on the shore were just too busy to listen. The focus on rapid repairs was a desperate attempt to maintain normalcy, to prove that any damage, any sign of imperfection could be instantly erased. It was a frantic act of self-deception. If we can fix the cracks fast enough, it's like they never happened. If we can pump the water out, it's like it was never there. But you can't patch a prophecy. You can't sweep a god's anger under the rug, no matter how technologically advanced your brooms are. The flying chariots became symbols of this denial. Their pilots would perform daring flybys of the damaged areas, broadcasting triumphant messages about the swiftness of the repairs. They were the city's cheerleaders, zipping through the sky while the ground beneath them was quietly plotting its revenge. Their speed and grace were a stark contrast to the slow, heavy, unavoidable truth that was rumbling just below the surface. So there we were, a city that had just been punched in the face by reality insisting it had ducked. A civilization with technology beyond imagination, yet with the emotional maturity of a toddler who closes his eyes and thinks he's invisible. The first tremor was a gift. It was a clear, unambiguous warning. It was a chance to wake up. But we chose to hit the snooze button. A fatal, and in hindsight darkly hilarious mistake. If you're still processing that initial shake-up, that first violent jolt of reality hitting a wall of hubris, then you absolutely must stick around for the aftershocks. The story doesn't get any less catastrophic from here. Don't let this broadcast be another ignored warning. Subscribe, hit that button and anchor yourself to this channel, because the ground is about to give way completely, and you won't want to miss the glorious tragic fall. Subscribe and hold on tight. After the ground threw its little tantrum, the sea decided it was its turn to play, and its game was much, much quieter. There were no violent waves, no dramatic frothing walls of water like you see in the epic poems. The ocean didn't roar, it swelled. It was a slow, deliberate, and deeply unnatural rising. The tide came in one afternoon and simply forgot to go out again. Then it crept higher and higher. It was like watching a bathtub fill with no one at the tap, a silent, implacable bloating that was far more terrifying than any storm. The sea, she was our friend, our provider, our great, beautiful, tamed pet. Now she's just greedy. At first, the experts on the shore, the hydrologists and the tidal engineers, were ecstatic. They had a new phenomenon to study. They called it a sustained barometric surge or some such nonsense. They deployed sensor buoys and chatted excitedly about unprecedented datasets. They stood on the rapidly shrinking beaches pointing at their tablets, completely failing to notice that the sea was now licking at the toes of their expensive sandals. They were so busy naming the monster, they didn't realize it was about to eat them. It was the most Atlantean response imaginable. When faced with an existential threat, we decided to classify it. The great sea walls of Atlantis, our pride and joy, became a subject of morbid fascination. We'd built them to withstand the rage of a 1,000-year storm. They were marvels of engineering, infused with crystals and reinforced with alloys of our own invention, but they were designed to repel attacks, to break waves. They were not designed for a siege. The water didn't smash against them, it just rose, inch by patient inch, until it calmly and disrespectfully spilled over the top. The day the water breached the Poseidon Gate wasn't with a crash, but with a gentle, continuous waterfall. It was the universe telling us our walls were irrelevant. That's when the lower districts began their transformation into a grand, unplanned aquarium. First, the fish markets, which seemed grimly appropriate. Then the dockworker tenements, the taverns where sailors like me used to lie about our exploits, the dye-makers' shops with their brilliant colors now bleeding into the salt water. The water crept into the streets with a quiet determination, reflecting the crystal towers in its ever-advancing surface. It was beautiful in a horrifying, everything I love is being destroyed kind of way. The city of gold and crystal was getting a new silver foundation. The official response was, as usual, a masterclass in misplaced confidence. The Royal Engineering Corps deployed the Archimedes pumps, colossal machines designed to drain any conceivable flood. They hummed to life, their great outlets spewing torrents of water back into the harbor. For a day or two it seemed to work. A small victory. The Council issued a statement praising the flawless operation of our civic defense systems, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. For every gallon they pumped out, 2 more spilled over the walls. The pumps began to strain, their triumphant hum turning into a desperate high-pitched whine. My ship, the Wave Dancer, became prime real estate. I'd been docked in the outer harbor, but as the water rose, so did I. Soon the harbor and the city began to merge. I untied my moorings, and with a bit of careful navigation, I sailed right over the submerged western quay and into the city proper. My ship is floating in the city. Let that sink in for a moment. I'm currently moored to the top of a statue of Lycurgus the Valiant in what used to be Plaza of the Tide, not usually a good sign, that. My keel is scraping against the rooftops of drowned houses. It gives a whole new meaning to the term inner city cruising. The disbelief was the most remarkable thing to watch. People in the upper districts would look down from their balconies at the newly formed canals where streets used to be. They weren't horrified, not at first, they were annoyed. The flood was a terrible inconvenience. It was ruining the morning commute for their flying chariots and making it frightfully difficult to get fresh sea urchins. They saw it as a temporary problem, a large-scale plumbing issue that the authorities would sort out eventually. They complained about the rising damp, not the rising doom. Meanwhile, in the submerged districts, a different kind of reality was setting in. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. It was a strange, waterlogged world of survival. People were using their furniture as rafts. The ancient rivalries between neighbors were forgotten as they worked together to string ropes between rooftops, creating makeshift bridges over the swirling avenues. A new economy emerged based on waterproof bags, dry firewood, and boats. Any boat. Even a leaky washtub was worth more than a sack of gold if it could get you to a dry spot. The sound of the city changed. The familiar hum of technology was replaced by the constant, gentle sound of water. Lapping, gurgling, flowing, and the sounds of people. Shouts echoing across the new canals, the creak of makeshift rafts, the splash of a dropped possession sinking into the murky depths. The city was losing its voice, and it was being replaced by the sigh of the ocean. The air grew heavy with the smell of salt and decay. Atlantis was beginning to smell like a forgotten pier. Our leaders, bless their hearts, tried to spin it. King Atlas the 27th gave a broadcast from a high tower, a map behind him showing the newly expanded waterways. He called it an aquatic revitalization of the city. He announced a competition to design elegant new gondolas for the flooded districts, with a prize for the most aesthetically pleasing design. He was trying to rebrand the apocalypse. I have to admit, it was a bold strategy. Terribly, suicidally stupid, but bold. The engineers, our fallen gods, were frantic. They tried everything. They attempted to build emergency levees out of rubble and solidified energy fields. The water just flowed around them. They tried to use sonic emitters to vaporize the water. That just created a thick, impassable fog and cooked a lot of fish. Their every brilliant solution was met with the ocean's simple, unwavering reply: more water. They were the smartest men in the world, defeated by the planet's most basic substance. Their arrogance was being systematically and very wetly dismantled. I became a reluctant ferryman. My little ship was a lifeline. I'd transport people, news, supplies. I took a philosopher from his drowning library to the relative safety of the Acropolis. He paid me with a single waterlogged book. The title was On the Futility of Human Endeavor. I told him he could have just saved himself the effort and looked out a window. He didn't find it as funny as I did. Dark humor, I've found, doesn't float as well as a good sturdy boat. The water was not just water. It was a solvent, dissolving our society. The lines of power, once so clearly drawn between the high-towered rich and the low-lying poor, were being redrawn by the waterline. A man's wealth was no longer measured in gold or crystals, but in how many feet his front door was above sea level. The great social pyramid of Atlantis was being eroded from the bottom up, and the whole thing was starting to look very, very unstable. The confusion was a tangible thing. Why wasn't it stopping? Where was all the water coming from? The sea level of the entire world seemed to be rising, but only for us. It defied all known laws of physics. The scientists who hadn't yet drowned were tearing their hair out. They couldn't explain it. And that, for them, was the greatest horror. Not the flood itself, but the fact that it was an unquantifiable, illogical event, a miracle in reverse. The great crystal began to react to the flood. Its sickly green light was reflected in the water that now surrounded its temple, making the entire central island glow. The priests claimed it was a sign of the crystal's power, that it was holding the water at bay. But from my vantage point, it looked more like a lighthouse on a rock that was about to be submerged. It wasn't a beacon of hope, it was a tombstone waiting for a name. Life aboard the wave dancer took on a surreal rhythm. I'd wake up, check my moorings on the statue's head, and look out over a city that was now more sea than land. Flying chariots would zip overhead, their occupants looking down on us with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, like tourists observing some strange native ceremony. The ceremony of drowning. I've started charging for sightseeing tours. Business is unfortunately booming. The rich in their towers began to complain about the view. The endless expanse of water was becoming monotonous, they said. It was also beginning to affect their infrastructure. The lower levels of their spires, where the power conduits and water purifiers were housed, were now underwater. Servants were sent down in diving bells to perform maintenance. Some of them didn't come back up. The inconvenience was slowly turning into a genuine problem, even for them. The resilience parade that had been planned after the earthquake was, of course, cancelled, or rather postponed. The official announcement said it was being reimagined as a grand flotilla celebration to honor the city's new relationship with the sea. The capacity for self-delusion in our leadership was truly bottomless. Unlike the city, which was rapidly finding its bottom, I saw things you wouldn't believe. I saw the Royal Orchestra performing on the roof of the Grand Concert Hall, playing a somber dirge as the water lapped at the eaves. I saw merchants trying to sell their wares from their windows to people floating by in makeshift rafts. I saw a child no older than 5 fishing from his bedroom window, his home now a prime waterfront property. We were all adapting, finding a sliver of normalcy in the heart of the absurd. The water kept rising. It was slow enough to give you hope, but relentless enough to crush it completely. Every morning, another landmark would be gone. Another street would become a canal. Another district would be surrendered to the sea. It wasn't a battle we were losing. It was a slow, methodical erasure. We weren't being conquered. We were being redacted. My little broadcast here, this is my log, my message in a bottle sent before the bottle itself goes under. I'm a sailor. I know the sea. I've fought her, respected her, loved her, but this is not the sea I know. This is something else. This is an executioner, and she is taking her sweet, sweet time. The whole world has become an hourglass, and we're the sand at the bottom. The attempt to fight back grew more pathetic. The council announced a plan to build a great crystalline dome over the central districts. The engineers just shook their heads. They knew it was impossible. The resources, the time, the stability, it was a fantasy. But the announcement served its purpose. It gave the people one last glittering piece of false hope to cling to as the water rose around their knees. The greed of the sea was patient. It consumed our city not with the fury of a predator, but with the calm, unthinking appetite of a glacier. It was an act of nature so profound and so absolute that our technology, our magic, our pride, they were all rendered utterly meaningless. You can't negotiate with a tide. You can't intimidate a flood. You can only float, or you can sink. Our city is becoming a memory, a story to be told by madmen and sailors who got away. I am broadcasting this for one reason, so that the story is told right. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't an enemy fleet. It was a quiet tide, a greedy sea, and a kingdom so proud it couldn't see it was already underwater. Support our very soggy last stand. Hit that subscribe button before the water rises too high and shorts out this trans. Do it now. Let our drowning be your warning. Just when we thought we'd gotten used to our new lives as amateur gondoliers in a drowning city, the ground decided it felt left out of the fun. We were so focused on the water, on the slow, creeping doom of the flood, that we forgot about the rock we were floating on. Or, as it turned out, the collection of loosely associated rocks. The first tremor was a punch. This was the earth trying to tear itself in half. The low groan started first, a sound that vibrated through the hull of the wave dancer and up through my bones. Then, with a sound like a god ripping a sheet of granite, the island began to break apart. The earth itself is tearing open. From my deck I watch the great onyx bridge, a marvel of single-span engineering, not collapse, but simply part in the middle, as a new chasm opened beneath it. The two halves stood there for a moment, like a bad joke, before tumbling into the roaring darkness below. The water, never one to miss an opportunity, immediately surged into the new canyon, creating a violent, churning river where a moment before there had been solid ground and a four-lane commuter route. It's like the ground has developed a sudden, very aggressive appetite for cities and people. The fissures weren't neat or tidy. They were jagged, chaotic wounds opening up all over the island. They would split open with a deafening roar, swallowing whatever was unfortunate enough to be sitting on top of them. I saw the entire Senate building, a place of endless debate and inaction, consumed in less than 10 seconds. It slid into a newly opened abyss with a great sigh of crumbling marble. At least it went down with the same silent, ineffectual dignity it displayed in life. Some of the senators were probably still arguing about the proper procedure for being swallowed by the earth as they went down. This wasn't just cracking, it was a total geological disintegration. Atlantis was no longer a single island, it was becoming an archipelago, a cluster of terrified little islets, each one convinced the others were shrinking. The elegant canal streets we had gotten used to were replaced by raging torrents and impassable, mile-deep chasms. Navigation became a nightmare. You'd be sailing down what was once Sapphire Avenue, only to find it now ended in a cliff with a several hundred-foot drop into a new, angry sea. The city's map was being redrawn every few minutes by a very angry, very drunk cartographer. The reaction of the people was predictable. The calm, detached annoyance of the upper crust evaporated. It's hard to feel superior when the ground beneath your ivory tower is actively trying to murder you. Panic became the new state religion. Flying chariots, once the symbols of wealth and leisure, became frantic escape pods, zipping haphazardly through the sky as their pilots tried to find a piece of land that wasn't actively crumbling. Many didn't make it, flying straight into newly opened rifts in reality, or crashing as the pilots had nervous breakdowns at the controls. Our so-called leaders were useless. The king, from his palace on what was now the Isle of the Citadel, broadcast a message of, well, I'm not sure what it was, a string of panicked platitudes about the indomitable Atlantean spirit and the temporary geological realignment. He was reading from a script, but you could see the terror in his eyes. The ground beneath his own palace was groaning. He was trying to project authority while his throne was vibrating like a cheap motel bed. The engineers, the ones who were left, were broken men. Their seismic dampeners, their reinforcement fields, their entire life's work was being rendered utterly, comically irrelevant. You cannot reinforce an island that has decided to become a collection of pebbles. I saw one of their chief architects, a man named Corvus, standing on a cliff edge, just staring at a chasm that had swallowed his masterpiece, the crystal Athenaeum. He wasn't crying, he was laughing. A high, unhinged giggle that was more terrifying than any scream. He'd finally seen the punchline to his own hubris. The wave dancer became my entire world. The sea, which I had cursed just days ago, was now the only safe place to be. The solid ground, the very symbol of safety and stability, was now a death trap. We sailors, who had always been looked down upon by the land dwellers, were now the lords of this broken creation. We could float. It was a simple, profound advantage in a world that was coming apart at the seams. I started referring to my ship not as a vessel, but as a planet. It was certainly more stable than the one we were floating next to. The new chasms revealed things. Layers of the island no one had ever seen. Strange phosphorescent fungi growing in rock layers millions of years old. The fossilized remains of creatures that had no business being there. It was as if the island's secret history was being violently vomited up for us to see in its dying moments. Our city was built on foundations far stranger and more precarious than we ever knew. We were just the latest and loudest tenants. The noise was constant. The grinding of rock, the roar of collapsing buildings, the hiss of seawater hitting superheated magma exposed by the deeper fissures. The air filled with a thick, choking dust of pulverized crystal and stone, mixed with a sulphurous steam from the planet's guts. It was hard to breathe, hard to see, hard to think. It was the symphony of deconstruction, and it was playing us out with a grand, cacophonous finale. The great crystal was now on its own, tiny island, the chasms having neatly carved away everything around its temple. It pulsed with a frantic, irregular light, its hum now a discordant shriek. The energy it was putting out was wild, uncontrolled. Beams of raw power would lance out from it, striking the clouds, making the sky boil. The priests who had once tended it were gone, presumably swallowed by a particularly devout bit of ground. The crystal was now a feral god, rabid and alone, screaming into the void. The social order didn't just collapse, it inverted. A man's worth was no longer his gold but his rope, not his flying chariot, but his ability to tie a decent knot. Knowledge of philosophy was useless, but knowledge of currents, the new, insane currents of the chasms, was priceless. The fishermen, the sailors, the riggers, the lowest of the low in our old world, were now the kings of the new one, and they were, by and large, just as confused and terrified as everyone else. I rescued a member of the Royal Council, found him clinging to a gargoyle that had broken off his sinking rooftop. He was a man who a week ago could have had me executed with a word. Now he was just a shivering, pathetic creature in a silk tunic. He offered me titles, land, anything I wanted, to take him to the king's citadel. I told him land was a rather volatile commodity at the moment, and that I'd settle for his signet ring. It looked like it would make a good fishing weight. He gave it to me, weeping. The sea became our only map. The chasms were so deep they reached the ocean from below. The island wasn't just being flooded from above, it was being inundated from within. New saltwater rivers were born in the heart of the land, tearing through districts that had, until now, remained high and dry. The water was coming from everywhere at once. The planet had decided to waterboard our entire civilization. The psychological toll was immense. People were suffering from what the few remaining healers were calling geological anxiety. They couldn't trust the ground. They'd walk with a strange, shuffling gait as if testing every step. They'd stare at the floor, expecting it to betray them at any moment. Which, to be fair, it often did. We had conquered the world, but we had lost our footing, literally and figuratively. The new landscape was a nightmare of surrealist art. A grand colonnade leading to nowhere, ending in a sheer cliff. A beautiful park sliced in two, with one half 50 feet lower than the other. A flying chariot nose down in a fissure, its tail sticking up like a strange metal flower. It was the ruins of a civilization, created in hours, not centuries, a speedrun of societal collapse. The wave dancer became an ark of sorts, not for animals, but for stories. People would come aboard and just talk, desperate to tell someone what they'd seen, to validate that the horror they'd witnessed was real. A musician told me how his concert hall had cracked in half mid-performance. An artist described a mural she'd just finished, now at the bottom of a chasm. I was becoming a collector of endings. The island of Atlantis was now a dozen or more smaller islands, all grinding against each other, all sinking at different rates. The channels between them were death traps of whirlpools and jagged submerged ruins. Sailing through what used to be the city was like navigating a blender full of razor blades. Every trip was a gamble. But staying still was worse. There was no still anymore. Everything was in motion. Everything was falling apart. The arrogance was gone finally, replaced by a raw, primal fear. All the poetry, the art, the science, it all boiled down to a single desperate thought: find a piece of rock that isn't moving. But there were none. The foundation of our entire world, the very thing we took for granted, had been a lie. We weren't a mighty kingdom on a solid island. We were a fragile culture on a poorly constructed eggshell, and it was hatching something terrible. I saw the king's palace, the last bastion of authority, start to go. One of its magnificent crystal towers, the spire of the sun, simply sheared off at the base and slid into a chasm with a slow, majestic grace. It disappeared into the roaring darkness without a sound reaching us over the din. The king didn't broadcast after that. I suspect his confidence, and possibly his transmitter, had been permanently disconnected. The geological nightmare was complete. We had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The earth, our mother, had turned on us. She was shaking us off like a bad case of fleas. The mighty Atlantis, the jewel of the ocean, was being shaken, flooded, and torn to pieces, all at the same time. It was a multi-pronged, very personal apocalypse. The scale of the destruction is hard to describe. Imagine your home, your street, your entire city, not just ruined, but fundamentally reconfigured by a malevolent giant. That's what it was like. The rules of geography no longer applied. North was a suggestion, up was a temporary state, solid was a matter of opinion. We were living in the debris of a broken world. The few remaining scientists had a theory. They babbled it to me over the radio before their station collapsed. The great crystal, they said, was connected to the island's geological core. Our overuse of it, our arrogant draining of its power, had destabilized the very bedrock of our existence. The power that built our paradise was the power that was destroying it, the ultimate irony. The gun we were so proud of had backfired, and it was blowing our whole world to bits. Help us understand these perplexing new land features. This island is now a jigsaw puzzle assembled by a lunatic, and we're trying to sail through the cracks. If you want a front-row seat to the complete and utter geological self-destruction of a world-class civilization, then you know what to do. Subscribe, anchor your feet to this broadcast, because the ground beneath our feet is gone, and the tales from the abyss are just getting started. Subscribe now, before our whole island becomes a footnote on a map that no one will ever see. As if being flooded, shaken, and torn into bite-sized pieces wasn't enough, our glorious crystal energy grid decided to throw its own citywide going-away party. For centuries it was our greatest boast, the endless clean, silent power of the great crystal channeled through a web of conduits that made our city glow like a jewel in the night. It powered everything, from our flying chariots to our self-peeling fruit platters. Now, it's more like a giant sparking tantrum, a massive geological-scale electrical fire. The heart of our civilization has gone into cardiac arrest, and it's taking everything with it. It started with flickers. The eternal, unwavering light of Atlantis began to stutter, like a dying candle. The lights would dim for a moment, plunging the city into a disorienting twilight, before roaring back to life with a surge that would blow out smaller crystals and make your hair stand on end. The engineers, or what was left of them, probably babbled something about power fluctuations due to seismic stress, but we knew. The beast wasn't just shaking its cage anymore, it was chewing on the wiring. Then came the explosions. The main power conduits, crystalline tubes as thick as ancient trees that ran beneath the major avenues, began to overload. The pressure of the shifting earth and the influx of conductive salt water was too much for them. They began to detonate, one by one. It's a spectacular sight, I'll give them that. A street would suddenly erupt in a silent, blinding flash of blue-white light, followed by a shockwave that could shatter windows for miles. It was like living through a fireworks display designed by a particularly malevolent god. Our glorious crystal energy grid? It's a joke. A very bad, very dangerous joke. Half the city's dark, plunged into a primal blackness it hasn't known for 1,000 years. The other half is glowing inexplicably, lit by the wild, uncontrolled energy bleeding from shattered conduits. Entire districts are bathed in a constant, eerie purple or a furious, strobing green. It's very bad for navigation. 1 minute you're sailing through a pitch-black canyon, the next you're blinded by a light bright enough to give a statue a sunburn. It makes finding a safe harbor a bit tricky. The uncontrolled energy surges created their own kind of weather. The air in the city now crackles. It hums with raw, untamed power. Miniature lightning storms will form around ruptured energy nodes, beautiful little tempests of purple energy that dance and writhe in the ruins. They're lovely to look at from a distance. Get too close and they'll flay the skin from your bones and atomize your ship. It's added a whole new layer of "don't go there" to the map I'm drawing in my head. With the grid failing, all our advanced systems went with it. The atmospheric regulators that kept the city at a perfect temperature, gone. Now we have pockets of intense heat from exposed energy cores and zones of unnatural cold where systems have died completely. The water purification plants, once capable of turning the filthiest water into pure nectar, they shorted out days ago. We're surrounded by water and none of it is safe to drink. The irony is so thick you could choke on it, which, incidentally, is what happens if you drink the water. The chaos this has unleashed is comprehensive. In the dark districts, it's a world of shadows and fear. In the hot zones of uncontrolled light, it's a world of blinding madness and strange mutations. I've seen plants growing at a startling rate, twisted into bizarre shapes by the raw energy. I've seen creatures of the sea drawn to the light, behaving erratically. The natural order has been unplugged and plugged back into the wrong socket. The flying chariots are mostly grounded. Their power crystals needed regular, stable recharging from the grid. Without it, they're just elegant, useless sculptures. The few that still had a full charge are used by the desperate and the foolish, flying through a sky now laced with invisible energy currents and arcs of raw power. I saw one get hit by a stray energy bolt yesterday. It just vanished. One moment a chariot, the next a puff of ionized gas and regret. The great crystal itself, the source of all this misery, is a terrifying sight. It no longer hums, it screams, a constant, high-frequency shriek that you feel in your soul. It's fractured almost completely, held together by nothing but its own insane energy. The light it emits is no longer a steady glow but a furious, chaotic storm of every color imaginable. It's the lighthouse at the end of the world, and it has gone completely mad. The loss of light has had the most profound effect on the people. We were a civilization that had banished the night. Our children grew up having never seen a truly dark sky, never seen the stars without the city's glow competing with them. Now, in the dead zones, they are seeing true darkness for the first time, and it is breaking them. The primal fears that our ancestors conquered with fire and crystal have come rushing back, and they are finding us utterly unprepared. From the wave dancer, the city now looks like a dying circuit board. Sections are dark and dead, others flicker erratically. Great angry sparks jump across the chasms that now separate the districts. It's the wreckage of a machine that has cannibalized itself. We were so proud of this machine. We thought we were its masters. Turns out, we were just the first components to burn out. The automated defense systems were another casualty. The city had energy shields to protect it from invasion, sonic cannons to deter sea monsters, the works, all powered by the grid. When the grid went haywire, so did they. Shields would flicker on and off at random, cutting off escape routes. Sonic cannons would fire at nothing, the deafening blasts echoing through the ruins and driving people mad. Our shield has become a cage, and our weapons are now firing indiscriminately into our own ranks. I tried to navigate the Obsidian Canal last night, a district that has gone completely dark. It was the most terrifying journey of my life. I was sailing blind, the only light coming from the phosphorescent sea life and the occasional, terrifying flash of a distant conduit explosion. I could hear things in the water, things that used to be kept at bay by the city's light and defenses. They're getting bolder. The fall of our civilization has been a dinner bell for the monsters in the deep. The knowledge of how to fix it is gone. The crystal smiths, the priest engineers who built and maintained the grid, were all housed in the Great Temple, a place that is now a solitary, inaccessible island surrounded by chasms and bathed in lethal radiation. Even if they are alive, they can't get out, and no one can get in. The instruction manual for our civilization is locked in a dying star, and we, the users, are comprehensively, royally doomed. The failure of the grid feels more personal than the earthquakes or the floods. Those were acts of nature. This is a suicide. Our own creation, our magnum opus, is the thing that is tearing us apart from the inside. We flew too close to the sun, and the sun was a giant temperamental crystal of our own making. It's a lesson in humility that we are failing to survive long enough to learn from. The air itself tastes different. It's metallic, sharp. The smell of ozone is overwhelming. It's the smell of pure, raw power being wasted on a biblical scale. Every crackle you hear, every flash of light you see, is the lifeblood of our civilization bleeding out into the uncaring sky. We are hemorrhaging energy, and there is no one left to apply pressure to the wound. I've had to jury-rig my own systems on the Wave Dancer. I've disconnected from anything that relied on the city's power. I'm running on sail, starlight, and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. I have a small independent crystal for my broadcast unit, but it's fading. Every word I send out drains it a little more. I'm trading my own power for this story, hoping someone, somewhere, thinks it's a worthwhile exchange. The silence in the dead zones is as terrifying as the noise elsewhere, a complete and total absence of the hum that has been the background music of our lives for generations. In the silence, you can hear the city groaning, the water trickling, your own heart pounding in your chest. We had forgotten what silence sounded like. It sounds like the end. The beautiful, intricate light patterns that once decorated our buildings are now just ugly, dangerous scars. The glowing filigree on the spire of commerce now just spits angry sparks at passing birds. The illuminated fountains in the Plaza of Heroes are dark, choked with mud and debris. All our beauty has turned ugly. All our strength has turned on itself. The city is not just dying, it's becoming a monster. There are whispers of strange apparitions in the zones of wild energy, figures made of pure light, dancing in the ruins. The scientists would have called it sentient plasma. The priests would have called them angels or demons. I just call them another good reason to stay on my boat. Whatever they are not friendly. They are the ghosts in our machine, and the machine is now a haunted house. The loss of the power grid was the final nail in the coffin. The floods isolated us, the earthquakes broke us, but the crystal catastrophe lobotomized us. It took away our senses, our defenses, our very identity as a technologically superior race. We are now just shivering survivors in the dark, huddled on broken rocks, listening to our greatest achievement scream itself to death. The contrast is breathtaking. One moment you're in a district so bright it hurts to look, where the very air shimmers with power. You navigate a narrow chasm, and you're plunged into a darkness so complete you can't see your own hands. The city is a checkerboard of heaven and hell, of blinding light and utter despair, and the board itself is crumbling. We are a people who tamed lightning, and now we are being hunted by it. We built a city of eternal day, and now we are terrified of the dark. Everything we prided ourselves on, everything that made us Atlantean, has been turned against us. This isn't a tragedy, it's a punchline. a cosmic joke, and we are the ones slipping on the banana peel. If you're finding this delightfully catastrophic, this tale of a high-tech society getting electrocuted by its own hubris, then don't just stand there in the dark. Smash that subscribe button now. Power up this broadcast with your support, because our own grid is well and truly fried. The sparks are flying, the lights are dying, and the show is just getting started. Subscribe before our last light goes out for good. So here we are, the final act. All the other horrors, the shaking, the floods, the cracks, the sparks, they were just the opening acts. The warm-up band for the main event, and the main event is this. We're sinking. It's not just the water rising anymore. The land, what's left of it, is going down. The ocean isn't coming to us, we are going to it. The horrifying realization has finally dawned on the last few survivors clinging to the highest peaks. Their entire world is on a one-way trip to the seabed. There is no higher ground left to scramble for. The top of the mountain is now the bottom of the sea. We're sinking. Not slowly like a leaky bucket, more like a very large, very ornate rock that's been dropped into a pond. Every hour, I watch from the deck of the Wave Dancer as another peak, another spire, another last refuge gives a final, shuddering sigh and slips beneath the waves. The water's cold, and getting higher, or rather, we're getting lower. It's a subtle but profoundly important distinction. One implies a disaster, the other an execution. The last desperate scramble was a sight to behold. All our refined culture, our philosophy, our art, it all boiled down to a frantic, clawing mob trying to climb over each other on a shrinking piece of rock. Lords and ladies who once commanded legions now fought with fishermen over a few square feet of muddy ground. Their silk tunics were torn, their faces streaked with grime, their eyes wide with the same primal terror. In the end, we all became equals, equally wet, equally doomed. From my ship, I am sailing over a ghost. The water is surprisingly clear in some places, away from the churning silt of the chasms. I can see it all below me. The grand avenues, the silent plazas, the crystal towers now acting as very expensive, very pretty reefs. Fish swim through the windows of the royal palace. Crabs scuttle over mosaics that once told the story of our divine origin. Our entire world, our whole history, is now just a fascinating bit of topography for the local marine life. The futility of escape is absolute. For a time, people held out hope that the sinking would stop, that ships from other lands would arrive. But the sinking hasn't stopped, and the world outside is vast and unaware. We were an island, in every sense of the word, so proud of our isolation, our self-sufficiency. That pride has become our tomb. There is no one coming to save us, because we never thought we would need saving. The highest point of old Atlantis was the tip of the spire of the Celestial Observatory on Mount Othris. I am currently floating directly above it. In fact, I had to fend off its pointed tip with an oar a few minutes ago to avoid scratching my hull. The last vestige of our mighty kingdom, the place from which we charted the heavens, is now a navigational hazard for a single, battered sailing ship. If that isn't a fitting final sentence for our grand story, I don't know what is. The great light of the city is gone. The wild, chaotic energy of the failing grid has finally been quenched by the sea. The great crystal, in its final moments, gave one last, silent pulse of incandescent turquoise light that illuminated the entire ocean from below. For a single breathtaking moment, our entire drowned city was visible, a perfect, glowing ghost under the waves. Then it went dark, and the screaming in my head stopped. The silence it left behind is somehow worse. What do people do when the end is not just near but here? Some pray. I can see them on the last little islet, a cluster of maybe 50 people kneeling before a priest who is gesturing wildly at the uncaring sky. Some fight. 2 men are brawling on the edge of the rock, presumably over who gets to drown second. And some just sit. They sit and watch the water creep up, their faces blank, with a despair so total it has looped back around to serenity. They have accepted the unacceptable. I saw the king, or I think it was him, a lone figure on the highest balcony of the citadel's central tower. which was, for a few hours, the last dry land. He wasn't wearing his crown or his robes, just a simple tunic. He wasn't shouting or praying. He was just standing there, looking out at the endless ocean that had swallowed his kingdom. As the tower gave a final lurch and began its slide into the sea, he looked up at my ship. I think he nodded, or maybe it was just a trick of the light. The Wave Dancer is no longer a ship in a drowning city. It is a ship in the middle of a new, open sea. The last peaks have vanished. There is nothing but water in all directions. The water and the debris. Pieces of our life float by. A carved wooden cradle, a scholar's cap, a shattered lute. Each one a tiny, heartbreaking eulogy for a life that is over. I am sailing through a graveyard of memory. The air is clean again. The dust and the ozone have been washed away. All you can smell is the salt of the sea. It feels as though the planet is taking a deep, cleansing breath, happy to be rid of the noisy, arrogant infection that was us. We were a fever, and the fever has broken. The world will heal. It will forget the scar that was Atlantis. What is a kingdom, really? Is it the buildings? They're gone. Is it the people? They're gone. Is it the knowledge? It's all pulp at the bottom of the sea. We were a story, a grand epic tale of brilliance and hubris. And the story has just ended. I am the epilogue, a lonely sailor broadcasting a final footnote into the void. The sheer totality of it is what I can't get over. Not a single survivor, except for me and the few souls I managed to pull from the water who now huddle on my deck, wrapped in sailcloth, staring at nothing. Not a single building left standing, not a single book left to read. The erasure is absolute. It is as if we were a dream, and the world has just woken up. I wonder what the historians of other lands will say, if they ever find a trace of us. They might find a strange, gold-threaded piece of cloth washed up on a distant shore, a curiously carved piece of crystal. They'll invent stories, a mythical kingdom, a legend. They will never know the truth. They will never know about the silent, greedy water. They will never know the sound of a city screaming itself to death. The water is calm now. The great turbulence of the sinking has subsided. The sea is flat and grey, stretching to the horizon. It is a blank page where our great city used to be, a perfect empty canvas. It is the most peaceful, and the most horrifying, sight I have ever seen. I have enough power in this little crystal for maybe one more broadcast after this, and I have a few barrels of fresh water and some salted fish. Enough to last a few weeks. After that, well, the sea is patient. She has swallowed a kingdom. A single sailor would be a paltry after-dinner mint. The final moments of the sinking were surprisingly quiet. After the roar of the chasms and the shriek of the crystal, the end came with a soft, final gurgle. The last bit of land, the peak of Mount Hubris, just slipped away. One moment it was there, a dark slash in the water. The next it was gone. There was a brief swirl, a few bubbles, and then nothing, just the endless, indifferent sea. We were fools. We thought we were masters of the ocean. We built our homes on it. We drew our power from it. We grew rich from its bounty. We never understood that we were just tolerated guests, and our lease was up. The landlord came to collect, and the rent was everything we had. To the few I have on board, the end of the world is not a bang. It is the drip of water from their wet clothes. It is the shivering cold that has nothing to do with the temperature. It is the vast, empty silence where their homes used to be. It is a quiet, personal, and unending apocalypse. The wealth of Atlantis is now just a treasure chest for a world that doesn't know it exists. Mountains of gold, rivers of jewels, all resting in the dark, waiting for no one. We spend our lives hoarding things that the sea has now claimed without a thought. We valued the wrong things. Our true treasure was the solid ground beneath our feet, and we didn't appreciate it until it was gone. The sea is full of ghosts. I can hear them in the creak of my ship's timbers, in the cry of the gulls that have started to follow me, the voices of the millions who went down with our island. They are the new sound of the ocean. a chorus of the drowned. I am the last Atlantean, a title I would not wish on my worst enemy. It is a title that means I am the keeper of a memory that no one else wants, that no one else can understand. I am a museum with a single weeping curator. So this is it. The end of the broadcast is near, the end of the story, the end of everything. We were Atlantis, the jewel of the oceans, the city of light, and now we are a secret whispered by the waves. We are a warning. Don't let our desperate cries fade into the depths. Don't let the silence win. Our entire world is gone. The least you can do is remember it. Remember us. Hit that subscribe button. Let it be an anchor for our memory in the vast ocean of forgetting. Let it be the one light that doesn't go out. Subscribe, please, before we are lost for good. You might think that in the face of total, unequivocal annihilation, the people in charge would, do something useful. But you would be wrong. You would be forgetting the singular, magnificent incompetence of the Atlantean ruling class. While the foundations of our world were cracking and the sea was reclaiming our streets, our esteemed leaders were engaged in the most urgent and pressing matters of state themselves. The disconnect wasn't just a gap, it was a chasm, wider and more terrifying than any of the new fissures tearing our island apart. They weren't just in their ivory towers, they were on another planet. A planet where the only things sinking were their approval ratings. Our esteemed High Council? I have it on good authority from a terrified junior scribe I fished out of the water that on the third day of the floods, their most heated debate was not about evacuation plans or shoring up the sea walls. No, it was about the proper ceremonial attire for a flood. Lord Valerius argued for waterproof silk robes in a dignified navy blue, while Duchess Cassia insisted that a shimmering silver, to match the new water features, was more appropriate. They spent 6 hours on it, meanwhile half the populace was swimming for their lives. Priorities, you see. The initial denial was a work of art. The king's first official address after the Great Tremor spoke of an unprecedented opportunity for urban renewal. The cracks in the earth were new, exciting subterranean vistas. The rising water was a bold, city-widely beautification project. He delivered this speech from a gilded balcony, looking down on a city that was actively tearing itself apart, with a smile so serene it could only have been achieved through a heroic dose of delusion or some very expensive wine. We weren't facing a catastrophe, we were experiencing a dynamic restructuring. Their inability to react effectively was baked into the system. Our government was designed to manage prosperity, not disaster. It was a labyrinth of committees, subcommittees, and advisory boards, each one dedicated to a specific, trivial aspect of our perfect lives. There was a committee for regulating the hue of public illumination crystals, and another for the optimal temperature of wine in the royal cellars. When the world started ending, there was no committee for that, so they did what they did best. They formed a new one. The Special Commission on Unforeseen Geological and Hydrological Events. I believe its first meeting was cancelled due to the meeting hall being underwater. The internal squabbles were the best part. The crisis didn't unite them, it just gave them new things to blame each other for. The high priest blamed the engineers for building a city that offended the gods. The engineers blamed the scientists for not predicting the disaster with their fancy models. The scientists blamed the council for cutting their funding. And everyone blamed the harbour master for the state of the dock. They were like a pack of rabid dogs, fighting over a carcass that was also the ship they were all sinking on. The disconnect between the royal court and the suffering populace was absolute. While the lower districts were turning into a deadly maze of flooded ruins, the king hosted the Grand Resilience Gala in the still dry citadel. The invitation, delivered by the few remaining flying couriers, was printed on waterproofed vellum and spoke of celebrating the Atlantean spirit. While people were starving and drowning just a few hundred feet below, the aristocrats were sipping shimmering cocktails and congratulating each other on their good fortune to be so high above it all. Their capacity for ignoring the screams of the dying was truly world-class. All official broadcasts were filtered through a thick layer of patronizing optimism. Public address systems would crackle to life not with warnings or instructions, but with soothing orchestral music and a calm voice telling everyone that our finest minds are at work and to remain patient. They told us to stay in our homes as the water rose to our windows. They told us the tremors were normalizing. As the ground split beneath our feet, it wasn't leadership. It was a city-wide lullaby sung to a child who was actively being eaten by a monster. The focus on petty things became a city-wide madness, trickling down from the top. I heard of a magistrate in the Opal district with water up to his waist, fining people for improperly moored furniture. In the Sapphire Quarter, the local guard was arresting people for looting, when the only thing to loot was driftwood and despair. They were trying to enforce the laws of a world that no longer existed, clinging to the wreckage of their own authority as the tide pulled them under. As a sailor, I had always had a healthy distrust of authority, land-based authority anyway. The sea is the only master that matters. But I never imagined the sheer scale of the incompetence. They had all the resources, all the technology, all the power. They could have organized an evacuation. They could have deployed their sky fleet to ferry people to the highest ground. They could have done 1,000 things, but doing things required acknowledging the problem, and acknowledging the problem would mean admitting that their perfect eternal Atlantis was, in fact, extremely vincible. And that was an admission their pride would never allow. The suffering of the populace became an abstract concept to them, a statistic. Reports indicate a 40% submersion of residential areas in the Garnet district. They would say it with the same emotional investment as reading a weather report. It wasn't their homes. It wasn't their families. From their gilded cages, the drowning city was just a tragic but distant spectacle, a rather messy and inconvenient theatrical production. The moment the people truly lost faith was palpable. It wasn't a riot. We were too wet and tired for that. It was a great collective turning of the back. The king would make an address and people would just float away. They stopped listening, they stopped obeying. They realized that the calm voice from the crystal speakers was not the voice of a savior, but the voice of their undertaker. The social contract was broken, dissolved in the rising tide. Such the high commander of the Atlantean Guard, a man famed for his rigid discipline, tried to command a squadron of his men to build a barricade against a fissure that was vomiting seawater. The men just looked at him, looked at the torrent of water, and then looked at their families huddled on a nearby rooftop. They dropped their tools and went to be with their loved ones. The commander stood there, screaming orders at no one, a perfect statue of obsolete authority. The apathy was a poison that had seeped into the very foundations of the leadership. They were so used to their power being absolute, their world being perfect, that they simply could not compute the idea of failure. Their response was not to adapt, but to insist that reality itself was wrong. The sea couldn't be rising, it was against regulations. The earth couldn't be breaking, it was structurally unsound. They were trying to issue a royal decree to the apocalypse, and the apocalypse was not listening. My little ship, the Wave Dancer, became a symbol of this disconnect. I was mobile, I was adaptable. I was dealing with reality as it was, not as I wished it to be. The great sky barges of the royal court, with their crystalline power sources, were now useless, their docking ports all under water. The mighty land-based vehicles were scrap metal. But my simple boat, a thing of wood and canvas and rope, could navigate the new world. The humble had inherited the flood. I rescued a royal scribe who told me the king had spent an entire day agonizing over a new title for himself. He felt King of Atlantis was no longer entirely accurate. He was considering Supreme Overseer of the Aquatic Realms or Lord of the Resilient Isles. This, while the isles in question were actively sinking, his concern was not for his people but for his brand identity. The petty squabbles continued even as the land masses shrank. Lord Valerius's islet and Duchess Cassia's islet were, for a time, the last two significant pieces of land. They immediately declared war on each other, not with weapons, they didn't have any left, but with insults shouted across the churning water. They accused each other of hoarding resources, of having a slightly less submerged rock than the other. It was the final, pathetic act of a ruling class that had learned nothing. I heard one of their final broadcasts. It was from Duchess Cassia. She was announcing a series of new taxes on anyone using the airspace between her rock and Valerius's rock. She called it a toll for aerial passage. At this point, the only things passing through that airspace were seagulls and despair, neither of which were known for carrying currency. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking. In the floating shanty towns of the common folk, there was cooperation. People shared what little they had, a dry blanket, a piece of hard bread, a story to pass the time. Strangers became family, bound by their shared catastrophe. In the high places, what was left of them, there was only division, blame, and a complete abdication of responsibility. The best of our people were at the bottom, and the worst were at the top. The hubris of our kings was not just that they thought they were invincible, it was that they thought they were important. They believed the universe cared about their titles, their bloodlines, their petty political games. They never understood that to the ocean and the earth, a king is just another piece of meat, another collection of bones to be ground into sand. When the citadel finally began to sink, the king's last order wasn't to save the children or the archives. It was to save the royal portrait gallery. He sent his last loyal guards to their deaths to rescue paintings of his own smug ancestors. The symbols of power were more important to him than the lives of his people. That's all you need to know about the men who led us to our doom. The final broadcasts from the leadership were just static. Not because their equipment failed, but because they had nothing left to say. The lies had run out. The false reassurances sounded hollow even to them. They were finally speechless, confronted with a reality so overwhelming that even their gilded tongues were silenced. They reigned over a perfect city, but they could not lead a drowning one. My ship is a kingdom of one, with a population of a few frightened refugees. My rules are simple. Help row, share what you have, and don't rock the boat. It's a more functional government than Atlantis had in its final days. It's a lesson I've learned the hard way. A good captain is worth 1,000 kings. We, the common people, the sailors, the fishermen, the merchants, we were Atlantis. Not the kings, not the council. We were the lifeblood, the energy, the soul of the city. And our leaders, in their apathy and their pride, were the disease that killed it. They didn't just fail to save us, they were the reason we needed saving in the first place. If you're still listening to this broadcast and not questioning your own leadership, whoever they may be, then you haven't been paying attention. We had the best leaders money could buy, and they led us straight to the bottom of the sea. So listen to this desperate voice from a dead city and learn something. Question everything. Trust in deeds, not words. And if your leaders are debating fashion while the water is at your ankles, it's time to find a boat, or better yet, subscribe to our channel. It's the last bastion of truth from a kingdom of lies. There comes a point in any disaster when denial finally drowns. For the last dregs of Atlantean society, that point has arrived. The king is silent, the council is gone, and the ground is still sinking. And so, the great escape began. Or, to be more accurate, the great, disorganized, and deeply pathetic attempt to throw oneself at the ocean and hope it spits you out somewhere dry. Everyone's trying to leave. Every floating thing that isn't nailed down, and some things that are, have been requisitioned by sheer, screaming panic. The last illusion of our unity has shattered, replaced by the simple, brutal instinct of self-preservation. The docks, or what was left of them, became the stage for our final, tragic comedy. The great shipyards of Atlantis, where we once built vessels that could cross the world in silent majesty, were now scenes of absolute bedlam. People who had never set foot on a ship in their lives were trying to launch war galleons and deep-sea exploration vessels. They fought on the gangplanks, trampling each other for a spot on a ship they had no idea how to sail. Gold, jewels, property deeds, all useless. The new currency was a strong arm, and a profound lack of scruples. Our grand fleet, mostly just getting in the way of each other, like fish in a very confused barrel, a very sinking barrel. I watched the Star of Hesperus, a magnificent Trident-class cruiser, attempt to leave its berth with a crew of panicked aristocrats at the helm. They managed to engage the crystal drive at full power while the mooring lines were still attached. The resulting spectacle of a 10,000-ton vessel trying to tear itself apart was, I admit, briefly entertaining. It solved the overcrowding problem on that particular ship at least. Then came the private submersibles. Oh, the submersibles. For years they had been the toys of the ultra-rich. Sleek, pearl-white vessels, shaped like manta rays or nautiluses, designed for leisurely tours of the coral reefs. Now they were seen as golden tickets to the deep. Their owners, who usually only knew which button summons the champagne, were now trying to pilot them through a churning soup of debris and collapsing buildings. Most of them became very expensive, very ornate coffins. Their emergency beacons are still blinking down in the dark, a sad little constellation of failure. The desperation bred a sort of frantic, useless ingenuity. I saw one man, a formerly respected philosopher, trying to escape on a raft made from his own bound volumes. He called it the vessel of pure reason. It sank, predictably. Another group tried to convert a flying chariot into a boat by attaching flotation devices to its wings. It just floated upside down, its occupants clinging to the undercarriage like bewildered bats. We were a civilization of geniuses, and we were being defeated by basic buoyancy. The chaos on the water is a navigator's nightmare. There are no rules, no right of way. Ships are colliding, running aground on submerged towers, getting tangled in the wreckage of their sister vessels. It is a traffic jam at the end of the world. I spend most of my time on the wave dancer, just dodging other people's bad decisions. It's like sailing through a demolition derby where all the drivers are blindfolded and screaming. The competition for limited spaces was brutal. Captains of the larger ships, the few who actually knew what they were doing, were selling passage for everything people had left: family heirlooms, wedding rings, last rations of food. And then, once they were out in the open water, some of them would simply turn their ships around and head back to another dock to sell the same spots again. A new and particularly grim form of piracy was born in our final hours. Humanity's capacity for cruelty, I've learned, is waterproof. Even the successful escapes are probably doomed. Where are they going? They are sailing into a vast, empty ocean with no charts, no knowledge of the outside world, and limited supplies. They are trading a quick death in the sinking city for a slow one on the unforgiving sea. But hope is a powerful drug. They believe that somewhere over the horizon there is a shore, a place that isn't actively trying to kill them. I, a man who has spent his life on the ocean, know better. The world is a lot more water than it is land. The failures were often spectacular. One of the great merchant bounty, the Golden Bounty, was so overloaded with people and treasure that its deck was level with the water. It managed to get out of the main harbor, its crew celebrating their escape. Then a tremor, not even a large one, sent a single, modest wave over the side. The weight was too much, it just settled. It sank so slowly, so gracefully, that the people on board didn't even have time to scream. They just looked confused as the water rose around their waists. My ship is a constant target. People see the wave dancer, a sturdy, seaworthy vessel, and they want it. I've had to fend off attempts to board us, people swimming out with ropes and grappling hooks, their eyes wild with desperation. I am armed with a harpoon gun and a profound desire to not have my deck overcrowded. It makes me a monster, I know, but in this new world, you are either a monster or you are a victim. I have made my choice. The few military vessels that were seaworthy tried to impose order. They fired sonic cannons as warnings and used their energy projectors to nudge ships apart. But they were crewed by men who were just as scared as everyone else. Men who had families they wanted to save. One by one, the warships abandoned their posts, loaded up with the captain's friends and relatives, and made their own run for it. Duty, like everything else, dissolves in salt water. The sounds are what will haunt me. The splintering of wood as ships collide, the metallic shriek of hulls scraping against submerged ruins, the roar of a crystal drive failing, and the shouting. The endless, desperate shouting. Cries for help, screams of terror, and the heartbreaking wails of people watching their loved ones disappear beneath the waves. It is the sound of a whole civilization being torn apart at the seams. I saw a group of priests attempt to leave on their ceremonial temple barge. It was a beautiful thing, all gilded carvings and silk awnings, but it was designed for calm temple pools, not the open, angry sea. They were chanting prayers for a safe passage as it was smashed to pieces against the half-submerged head of a statue of Poseidon. The god of the sea, it seems, has a dark sense of humor. Makeshift rafts are everywhere. Doors, tables, bundles of reeds, anything that will float. They are crewed by the poorest, the ones who couldn't buy or fight their way onto a real ship. They are the most hopeless of all, clinging to their pathetic little islands of debris as the currents pull them into the churning chasms or out into the vast empty ocean. Their faces are blank with a kind of exhausted horror. The Atlantean dream of flight became a nightmare. The few remaining sky chariots became objects of intense desire. People would climb the highest towers, fighting each other for a chance to leap onto a departing chariot. Most just fell to their deaths. The sky, once our playground, was now just a faster way to reach the bottom. Some simply gave up the idea of escaping by sea. They climbed to the highest remaining peaks, which were by now little more than small, crowded islands of mud and rock. They chose to face the end on what was left of their earth, rather than trust the treacherous water. They are the statues of our demise, silent witnesses to the final curtain call. The wave dancer has become my fortress. I have my small crew of fellow sailors, the refugees I couldn't bring myself to turn away. We are a tiny, floating nation of the dispossessed. We share what we have, we stand watch in shifts, and we try not to look too closely at the faces of the people we have to leave behind. Each one is a ghost that will follow us across the sea. The grand irony is that our greatest naval minds, our admirals and fleet commanders, were the first to go. Their flagships were housed in the main naval base, which was swallowed by one of the first and largest fissures. They went down with their command centers, leaving a fleet without a brain. It was a decapitation strike delivered by the planet itself. The escape is not an organized evacuation, it is a panicked stampede. There is no coordination, no plan. It is every man, woman, and child for themselves. We are not a fleet in retreat. We are a swarm of insects fleeing a fire, scattering in all directions with no thought but to escape the heat. I watch the submersibles that fail. They don't explode, they just implode. The pressure of the deep, a force our engineers thought they had conquered, reasserts its authority. A flicker of light, a dull crunch that you feel more than hear, and the vessel is gone, crushed into a ball of scrapped metal. The sea does not like trespassers in its depths. The sheer waste is staggering. Ships that could have saved hundreds are lost because of a single panicked mistake. Resources that could have supplied a dozen families for a month are sunk to the bottom in a foolish attempt to save personal treasures. We are not just dying, we are dying stupidly. The wave dancer keeps sailing. We are moving through the outer channels now, leaving the worst of the chaos behind, but the sea is littered with the evidence of it. A floating sail, a broken mast, a child's toy. The ocean has become our tombstone, and it is covered in the epitaphs of our failure. We are running from a home that is trying to eat us, running towards a future that is, at best, a question mark. The great and powerful Atlantis, reduced to a fleet of refugees, scattering like seeds on a bitter wind. Perhaps some of us will find fertile ground, but most of us, I fear, will just fall on barren rock or into the unforgiving sea. Support our desperate escape attempts. We are the last stories of a city that is gone. We are the final, fading voices. If you want these stories to survive, if you believe that a memory is worth saving from the abyss, then subscribe now. Nail your colors to our mast. Join our desperate, lonely fleet. Subscribe because every new name feels like a flicker of hope on a very dark and very empty ocean. Just when you think you've seen the absolute worst the universe has to offer, the universe gets creative. We were dealing with the floods, the sinking, the chaos of the escape. We thought we understood the parameters of our doom, but we forgot one crucial detail. When you violently demolish the house of a sleeping giant, the giant tends to wake up. And our house was built on the roof of a very, very deep basement. And now, The ocean's basement dwellers are joining the party. The tremors and the chasms didn't just break our island, they broke the seal on a whole new chapter of horror. At first we thought it was just debris, strange shapes in the churning water, things that moved with an unnatural speed. But debris doesn't have rows of phosphorescent lights. Debris doesn't have tentacles. The sea, already a terrifying soup of wreckage and drowning people, was now teeming with things. Creatures from the abyssal plains, the lightless trenches, things that had never seen the sun, driven from their homes by the sound and the fury of our world collapsing. They were angry, they were confused, and they were hungry. And now the ocean's basement dwellers are joining the party. Turns out deep-sea squids the size of a 3-story building don't appreciate being woken up by falling cities. Can't blame them. I saw one myself last night. It rose from the depths, its body a pale, ghostly white, its eyes like twin moons, cold and intelligent. It wrapped its tentacles around a merchant ship, the pride of Orichalcum, and there was no grand battle, just a quiet, irresistible drag into the abyss. The ship was gone in less than a minute. No screams, no struggle, just gone. It's not just the big ones. The new chasms are vomiting up all sorts of smaller nightmares. Swarms of creatures that look like a cross between a piranha and a nightmare, with teeth like shards of obsidian. They are drawn to the light and the blood. They attack the makeshift rafts, stripping them of their occupants in a frenzy of thrashing water. The poor souls clinging to debris don't just have to worry about drowning anymore. They have to worry about being devoured by things they don't even have a name for. The chaos of the escape fleet has turned into a dinner bell. The sound of struggling crystal drives, the panicked shouts, the thrashing of 1,000 desperate swimmers. It's all a signal to the things below. Come and get it. The great Atlantean race, the masters of the world, are now just bait. We've turned our own graveyard into a feeding ground for the horrors we never knew existed. The so-called sea dragons, the plesiosaurs our scientists had cloned and kept in aquatic preserves, were some of the first to go. We thought them monsters. They were goldfish compared to what was coming up from below. I saw one of our prize sea dragons, a magnificent beast 20 feet long, snatched from the surface by something vast and serpentine, with a jaw that unhinged like a snake's. It was a horrifying, valuable lesson. There is always a bigger fish. The Atlantean navy, what's left of it, is useless. Their sonic cannons, designed to deter the known fauna of the upper ocean, seem to only irritate these new arrivals. One warship fired a full sonic volley at a colossal crab-like creature that had surfaced near the wreckage of the lighthouse. The creature, which had legs like fallen trees and a shell encrusted with glowing parasitic fungi, simply paused, turned its multifaceted eyes towards the ship, and shattered its hull with a single, contemptuous strike of its claw. The deep-sea squids are the worst. The kraken, our old sailor's myth. We used to tell stories about them to scare children. The reality is so much worse. They are not just beasts, they are intelligent. They seem to be studying us. I've seen them ignore a dozen smaller rafts to go after a single, large, well-lit vessel. They are drawn to our technology, our light, our arrogance. They are the ocean's antibodies, and we are the infection they have come to purge. The water around my ship, the Wave Dancer, is no longer safe to touch. Strange gelatinous organisms, glowing with an internal sickly light, float by in great pulsating masses. They secrete a corrosive acid that can eat through wood and metal. We have to constantly push them away with long poles. My beautiful ship is now pockmarked with acid burns. It's like sailing through a sea of angry, floating stomachs. The ancient colossal beings are making their appearances. These are not just creatures, they are geological events. I saw one just for a moment in the distance, a shape that blotted out the stars, a mountain of living flesh that rose from the sea and then submerged again, its passage creating waves that nearly capsized us. It was so large, my mind simply refused to accept it. It was a being from an older, wilder world, a world before gods and men, and we, in our dying throes, have woken it up. The psychological impact on the survivors is devastating. We were already broken by the loss of our homes, our families. Now we are being hunted. We are no longer just victims of a natural disaster, we are prey. The fear is no longer just of death, but of being consumed, of being dragged into the lightless deep by something ancient and hungry. It has added a sharp, toothy edge to our despair. The competition for resources has become even more savage. A ship that is being attacked is not a tragedy to be mourned, it is an opportunity. While the monsters are busy with one vessel, others use the distraction to speed away. We have become a flock of birds, sacrificing the weak to save ourselves from the hawk. Our much-vaunted civilization has been stripped down to its most brutal, primal instincts. I had a close call this morning. A creature that looked like a great armored eel with a face full of needle-like teeth tried to ram us. It was fast, incredibly fast. It slammed against the hull, and the whole ship shuddered. We fought it off with harpoons and axes, but it was like trying to fight a locomotive with toothpicks. It only left when a larger shadow passed overhead, and the eel, in a moment of primal terror, fled into the depths. We were saved from one monster by the passing of an even greater one. The experts on board the few remaining command ships are frantically trying to classify the new arrivals. They are giving them names based on our old mythology: hydras, chimeras, skyllas. It's a pathetic attempt to impose a familiar order on an incomprehensible horror. Naming the thing that's eating you doesn't make it any less deadly, it just makes for a more scholarly-sounding obituary. The bioluminescence is the worst part. At night the sea is no longer dark, it is a swirling canvas of eerie light. The glowing swarms of small predators, the pulsing jellies, the spectral lights of the colossal squid in the depths. It is a beautiful, terrifying light show, a carnival of monsters. We are floating through a nightmare, and the nightmare is glowing. The creatures seem to be communicating. The clicks and moans I hear over the broadcast are not random. They are a language, a deep, resonant language of the abyss. They are talking to each other, hunting together. I do not want to know what they are saying. I am sure it does not involve wishing us a pleasant journey. Some of the smaller, faster submersibles have actually been captured, not crushed, but taken. I saw one get entangled in the phosphorescent net of a creature that looked like a living nebula. The net contracted, and the submersible was just absorbed into the creature's vast, shimmering body. The occupants are probably still alive in there. I cannot imagine a worse fate. The royal menagerie, where the king kept his collection of exotic beasts, was located on a coastal cliff that has now collapsed into the sea. I can only assume that his prized albino sea griffins and gem-scaled hydras are now interacting with the local wildlife. I hope they are getting along. It would be a shame for all that carefully curated snobbery to go to waste. The air smells of salt and ozone and something else, something ancient and fishy. The smell of the deep. It is a heavy, oily smell that clings to everything. It is the smell of a world without sun, a world of immense pressure and eternal cold. It is the smell of our new neighbors, and they are not pleasant. The wave dancer feels smaller than ever, more fragile, a tiny, insignificant speck of wood in a world of giants. My crew and I are constantly on watch, our eyes scanning the dark water, our hands never far from a weapon. We do not sleep much. Every shadow, every strange ripple could be the end. The creatures are changing the very environment around us. They are releasing spores, inks, chemicals into the water. The sea is becoming a toxic soup, their own alien ecosystem overwriting our familiar one. We are not just sinking in our ocean, we are sinking in theirs. Some have started to worship the beasts. Small, desperate cults have formed on the larger refugee ships. They make offerings. They throw treasure, food, even people over the side, hoping to appease the new gods of the sea. It has not worked. The monsters are not gods. They are just hungry, and we are the offering. I wonder if this was always here, this world of monsters, lurking just beneath our feet. If our entire civilization, our entire reality was just a thin, fragile crust over a much older, much more terrifying truth. We thought we were the masters of the planet. We were just the inhabitants of a small, well-lit room in a very large, very dark house. And now the walls have come down. If you're enjoying this aquatic horror, this live report from the all-you-can-eat buffet at the end of the world, then show your support. The creatures of the deep are rising, and so should our subscriber count. Please subscribe for more tales of things with too many teeth and not enough manners. Hit that button now. It's a small beacon of light in a world that is getting darker and hungrier by the minute. This is it, the last broadcast from a world that no longer exists. A ghost talking from a ghost ship. From the deck of the Wave Dancer, I am looking at an empty horizon. An hour ago, that horizon was broken by the last defiant peak of Mount Othris, the final jagged tombstone of Atlantis. Now there is nothing, just a sky bleeding into a sea. The final plunge is over. The greatest city the world has ever known has been officially and irrevocably cancelled. We watched it go. The few of us on this ship, this tiny floating speck of memory. The last island, the final refuge for a handful of screaming survivors, gave a great final shudder. It wasn't a slow slide. It was a sudden, violent surrender. The earth gave up its long fight, and the sea, which had been so patient, finally claimed its prize. The mountain went under, not with a gentle sigh, but with a roar that seemed to tear the very air apart. There she goes, the greatest city, gone, like a pebble in a pond, only with more screaming. The screaming stopped, of course, very quickly. A fitting end, perhaps. We always thought we were so grand, so important, a permanent fixture of this world. Turns out we were just a brief, noisy interruption to the silence of the sea. In the moments after the last peak vanished, a new horror was born. The ocean, rushing in to fill the immense void left by our sinking continent, began to spin. A whirlpool. Not the kind of whirlpool you see in a bathtub. This was a whirlpool that was miles across, a swirling, roaring vortex, a drain at the center of the world. It was as if the ocean itself was trying to swallow its own tail, and our city was caught in its throat. The sound was the end of all sound. It was the roar of 1 billion tons of water crashing into the deep, the shriek of trapped air exploding from submerged caverns, the final grinding scream of a dying geology. It was a sound that didn't just enter your ears, it vibrated through your bones, your teeth, your soul. It was the sound of a closing door, a very large, very final door, slamming shut on an entire civilization. We were nearly pulled in. The Wave Dancer, for all her sturdiness, was like a leaf in a storm drain. I had the helm, my knuckles white, fighting the current. My small crew, my fellow ghosts, worked the sails with a silent, desperate efficiency. We were sailing uphill, against a current that was pulling us towards the center of the abyss. For a long, terrifying hour, our fate hung in the balance. We were on the lip of oblivion, and oblivion has a terrible, terrible thirst. Then, as suddenly as it began, the roaring lessened. The vortex widened, slowed, and began to calm. The sea, having swallowed our world, was settling its stomach. The great drain gurgled, sighed, and then fell silent, and in its place, an eerie, unnatural calm. The water was like glass, disturbed only by the debris and the bodies that slowly began to surface. The sea was giving back the things it didn't want to keep. And then, silence. A silence more profound and more complete than I have ever known. The screaming was gone, the grinding of rock was gone, the hiss of steam was gone. All that was left was the gentle lapping of the water against my hull and the sound of my own ragged breathing. It was the silence of a tomb, the silence of a world wiped clean, the silence of absolute, undeniable finality. The sky is full of birds, seagulls, albatrosses, birds that have no business being this far from land. They circle endlessly, crying out in confusion, looking for a place to rest that no longer exists. They are the only other mourners at our funeral. They, and the few of us on this ship. We are the last living things in a world that has died. The debris field is miles wide. It is the wreckage of our life. A shattered cradle, a splintered harp, a sodden book whose title is no longer legible. It is a soup of broken dreams. I saw the royal standard of Atlantis float by a moment ago, its golden kraken emblem tangled in seaweed. I didn't even have the heart to fish it out. Let it sink. Let it all sink. The psychological toll on the survivors on my ship is immense. They don't speak, they just sit, huddled in blankets, staring at the empty water where their homes once stood. Their eyes are hollow. They have witnessed the end of everything they have ever known. How does a mind process that? How do you come back from watching your entire world disappear beneath the waves? I don't think you do. You just become a ghost, haunting the shell of your own body. We were a monument to hubris. We built our towers to the sky, convinced of our own permanence. We tamed the elements, we harnessed the power of the gods, we solved every problem except the most important one, our own arrogance. We believed we were the masters of this world. The world has just corrected our grammar. We were not the masters, we were a temporary condition. I look at my hands on the helm. A sailor's hands, calloused, scarred. They are the hands that fought the sea, that mended the sails, that held the line. And they are the hands that failed to save anyone but a handful of broken souls. I am the last captain of a sunken kingdom. It is a lonely and very pointless command. The sun is setting now. It is casting a brilliant, beautiful orange and purple light across the water. It is a sunset just like any other. The universe does not pause to mark our passing. The sun sets, the moon will rise, the stars will wheel across the sky. We were a flicker, a brief, incandescent spark in the eternal darkness, and now we are out. I think of the great library of Alexandria, a place I only heard of in sailors' tales. They say it burned, a tragedy, all that knowledge lost, but we did not burn, we drowned. Our knowledge, our history, our very essence is now resting under miles of water, being slowly consumed by salt and pressure. Which is worse, a quick death by fire or a slow, cold erasure by the deep? I do not know. The few children I have on board are the most heartbreaking. They are too young to understand what they have lost. They only know that they are cold and hungry and that their parents are gone. They do not weep. They are just quiet. A quiet that is more devastating than any scream. They are the last generation of Atlanteans, and their inheritance is an ocean of grief. The ocean has claimed everything. Our gold, our art, our technology. It is the greatest act of repossession in history, and we are the evicted tenants, adrift on a piece of wreckage, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a memory of a place that was. What will become of us? The few who escaped on other ships, the handful on my own. We are a people without a land, a story without a page. We will be absorbed into other cultures, our bloodlines will thin, our language will be forgotten. In a few generations, Atlantis will be what it was before it existed, a myth, a whisper on the wind. I am broadcasting this last message not with any hope of rescue. That hope is long gone. I am broadcasting this as an act of defiance, a final, futile gesture against the silence. To say that we were here, we lived, we built something magnificent, and we died, spectacularly by our own hand. Let the universe know that. Let the silence not have the final word. The water is so calm it is hard to believe that this placid surface is the tomb of millions, that beneath this gentle swell lies a city of wonders, now crushed and lightless. The sea is a beautiful, terrible liar. It hides its violence well. I will turn my ship east, towards the rising sun. I will sail until I find land, or until my supplies run out. My passengers, my crew, deserve at least that. A chance, a slim, desperate chance to start again. But a part of me will always remain here, in this empty patch of ocean circling the grave of my home. So this is the end. The final plunge is complete. Atlantis is gone. The jewel of the ocean has been returned to the jeweler. We are a memory. a cautionary tale, a ghost story to be told by sailors on long, dark nights. Remember us, remember our greatness, and remember our fall. Keep the tragic, watery history coming. Don't let our stories sink into the abyss along with our city. The waves have swallowed our homes, but they don't have to swallow our memory. Like and subscribe. Let our final, desperate broadcast be a beacon. Let it be a warning. Let it be the last testament of Atlantis. So, we're floating. The screaming has stopped. The ground is done with its theatrics, and the sea has swallowed our world whole. The great drama is over, and now we begin the epilogue. A very long, very quiet epilogue. The few of us who made it out, the flotsam of a drowned kingdom, are now adrift. This is survival, I suppose. It's not the heroic, triumphant struggle you read about in the epics. There is no glory, no defiant last stand. Turns out, surviving the end of the world is less triumphant and more wet and profoundly lonely. The world is now divided into two parts. This ship, the wave dancer, and everything else. Everything else is water, an endless, indifferent blue-gray expanse. We are a tiny, self-contained world of grief sailing on a sea of forgetting. The sun rises, the sun sets. The stars come out. They are the same stars we used to watch from our crystalline observatories, but they look different now. Colder, more distant. Or maybe it's just us. The reality of our situation is beginning to set in, and it's a grim, sober sort of thing. Our supplies are finite. We have 3 barrels of fresh water, a half-dozen crates of salted fish, and a sack of hardtack that could probably be used to patch the hull. We ration it out with a miserly precision. Every sip of water, every dry biscuit is a small victory against the inevitable. We were a people who feasted in halls of gold. Now we celebrate not starving for one more day. The psychological toll is the heaviest cargo we carry. The handful of survivors I pulled from the water rarely speak. They just sit, staring at the horizon, as if they expect Atlantis to suddenly resurface with a sheepish apology. Their eyes are full of ghosts. They see their homes, their families in the shape of every passing cloud. I try to talk to them, to offer some sailor's platitudes about hope and new dawns. They just looked through me. They survived, but I think their souls went down with the city. We are surrounded by the ghosts of our ambition. Every piece of floating debris is a reminder. A gilded chair leg, a shred of a silk banner, a child's wooden toy soldier. These are the artifacts of our failed greatness. We reached for the heavens, and our reward is to be adrift in a purgatory of our own making, haunted by the dollar-store trinkets of our magnificent civilization. I've started collecting the debris. I'm not sure why. Maybe I'm building a museum of failure. I am the captain of this sad little ark. My crew consists of a traumatized philosopher who now just polishes the same lens from his spectacles over and over, 2 merchants' children who have forgotten how to cry, and a former royal guard who still stands watch, facing the empty sea where his city used to be. We are a pathetic collection of broken parts, held together by a shared, unspeakable memory. Navigation is a matter of guesswork and prayer. Our charts are useless. They describe a world that is gone. I am steering by the sun and stars, the old way, the way of my ancestors before they got clever with crystals and automated helms. I have chosen a direction, east, and I will hold to it, but for all I know I am sailing us deeper into an endless ocean, chasing a sunrise that will only ever illuminate more water. The solitude is the real monster. Out here, the beasts of the deep have returned to their dark homes. The sea is quiet again. Too quiet. The silence presses in on you. It gives you too much time to think, to remember the sound of the city, the hum of the crystals, the laughter in the taverns, and then to remember the screaming. The silence is full of the noise of our extinction. We tell stories, or rather I do. The others just listen, their faces blank. I tell them tales of my life at sea before the end, of distant ports, of strange creatures, of storms weathered and treasures found. I am trying to remind them that there was a world before Atlantis, and so, perhaps, there can be a world after. They listen, but I don't know if they hear me. Their past is a wound too deep to be healed by stories. The nights are the hardest, the sun sets and the darkness is absolute, a profound star-dusted blackness that we in our city of eternal light had never known. It is in the dark that the ghosts are boldest. In the dark you can almost believe you hear the bells of the drowned city tolling beneath the waves. You can almost feel the weight of the millions of souls resting in the deep below us. The night is a graveyard, and we are floating on the tombstone. We saw another ship, once, on the third day. A single sail on the horizon. For a moment a wild, foolish hope surged through me. We were not alone. I tried to signal them, but they were sailing in the opposite direction, and they did not turn. Perhaps they were just as lost as we are, or perhaps they saw us, a battered ship full of broken people, and decided that solitude was the better option. I cannot say I blame them. Our ambition was our downfall. We weren't content to be prosperous, we had to be magnificent. We weren't content to be safe, we had to be invincible. We challenged the gods, the planet, the very laws of nature. And we lost. We lost spectacularly. This lonely, drifting existence is the price of that arrogance. We aimed for godhood and achieved oblivion. I find myself talking to the sea, a sailor's madness perhaps. I ask it questions. Why? Was our pride so offensive? Was our light so blinding? The sea, of course, does not answer. It just offers its endless rhythmic sigh. The answer, I suppose, is in the silence. The answer is that there is no answer. It just happened. We were an experiment, and the experiment failed. The philosopher spoke today, the first time in a week. He looked at me, his eyes strangely clear, and said, "We are a concept now, a cautionary tale." Then he went back to polishing his lens. He is right. We are no longer a people. We are an idea. A lesson about pride that will be taught by people who never knew us in languages we never spoke. Our legacy is to be a metaphor. The former god is the most tragic, I think. He still maintains his discipline. He rations his own food strictly. He stands his watch without fail. He keeps his single remaining dagger polished. He is guarding a kingdom that is gone, protecting a people who are dead. He is the last loyal soldier of Atlantis, and his loyalty is to a ghost. The children sometimes play. They'll chase each other around the small deck, their laughter a strange, alien sound in this world of silence. For a moment they forget. They are just children on a boat. And in those moments I feel a sliver of something that feels like hope. But then they will stop and look out at the water, and I see the memory return to their eyes, and the hope dies. We are all that's left of the great Atlantean gene pool, a washed-up, traumatized, and frankly not very impressive collection of individuals. If we are to be the Adam and Eve of a new Atlantean race, then the future is in very strange hands indeed. I am a cynical sailor, and my companion is a philosopher who has given up on reason. It is not a promising start. The dreams are the worst. We all have them, dreams of the city as it was. We walk the sun-drenched plazas, we fly our chariots through the crystal spires, we are with our families, our friends. And then we wake up. We wake up to the creak of the ship, the smell of salt, and the crushing weight of what we have lost. Waking up is the hardest part of the day. I think of the world we build, the art, the music, the science. We had cured almost every disease. We had unlocked the secrets of the atom and the stars. We had created a paradise. And we were so busy admiring our own creation that we failed to notice the cracks in its foundation. We were the most brilliant, most advanced, most foolish civilization in the history of the world. Sometimes I see a flicker of the old Atlantis in my companions. The guard will instinctively straighten his back when he sees me. The philosopher will absent-mindedly trace a complex equation on the deck with his finger. They are echoes of the people they used to be. Faint, fading signals from a lost world. The wave dancer is a good ship. She has carried us through the end of the world. She is wounded, scarred, but she is strong. She is the last piece of Atlantis that is not at the bottom of the sea. I talk to her too. I thank her for her strength, for her resilience. She is more alive to me now than most of the people I have known. I will continue this broadcast for as long as my crystal has power. It feels like a duty to bear witness, to ensure that our story is not completely erased. Perhaps no one is listening. Perhaps I am just whispering my grief into the wind. But I must do it, for the king who nodded at me, for the philosopher who understands, for the children who have forgotten how to cry, for all the ghosts of my ambition. We are the survivors, the lucky ones, they might say. But as I look out at the endless, empty sea and feel the profound, crushing loneliness of this new world, I have to wonder, are we the lucky ones? Or are we just the ones with the longest sentence to serve? If you're still processing this epic demise, this slow, lonely fade into nothing, then you are a part of this story now too. You are a keeper of the memory. Don't let it end here. Be sure to subscribe. Join our ghost ship. Let us not be completely alone in this vast, silent world. Your subscription is a signal back to us, a sign that we are not just screaming into the void. Subscribe. This is the last of the wine, so to speak, the final dregs of power from a dying crystal. I've been broadcasting for days? Weeks? Time has become a strange, soupy thing out here on this endless expanse of water, but the light on this transmitter is blinking, a final, polite little cough before it gives up the ghost entirely. So, this is it. The final transmission. The last will and testament of a city that thought it would live forever. We have chronicled our own demise, a grand, multi-act tragedy of our own making. We began with pride, didn't we? The Gilded Age, we called it, when our towers scraped the heavens and our power seemed limitless. We were gods in our own minds, so busy admiring our reflections in our crystal halls that we failed to see the cracks forming in the glass. We laughed at the omens, we scoffed at the prophets, and we patted our engineers on the back for a job well done, even as the ground beneath their feet began to grumble. The first lesson of Atlantis: arrogance is a very poor life raft. Then the earth threw its tantrum, and the sea decided to stop playing by the rules. We witnessed the first tremors, the initial violent rebuttal to our claims of invincibility, and then the floods began, not with a bang but with a quiet, relentless swelling of the tide. The sea, our oldest friend, became our most patient and greedy enemy, swallowing our golden streets and turning our perfect city into a mockery of Venice. We learned that our mighty sea walls were merely suggestions, and our advanced pumps were little more than children bailing against the tide with seashells. And just when we thought we had adapted to our new aquatic lifestyle, the island itself broke apart. The chasms opened, great roaring maws in the earth that consumed our history and our future with equal geological indifference. We became a terrified archipelago of the doomed. Our glorious, intricate power grid, the very heart of our civilization, threw a final, spectacular tantrum, plunging us into a nightmare of light and shadow before dying completely. The beasts from the lightless deep, disturbed by our noisy end, rose to feast on the wreckage. It was, you have to admit, a very thorough apocalypse. And so, as the sun sets on a world that no longer holds Atlantis, this has been Captain Lero, your humble and remarkably still afloat broadcaster from the final plunge. We saw the floods rise, the earth crack, and a kingdom drown beneath the waves of its own arrogance. We watched our kings squabble, our escapes fail, and our last hopes extinguish, one by one, until only the sea remained. My little ship, the Wave Dancer, is now the last moving piece of a civilization that is forever still. We are the echo, the footnote, the ghost on the water. If this desperate, darkly humorous transmission from the very depths of myth has given you a moment of grim amusement or a profound appreciation for stable ground, then my purpose is served. I didn't send this message into the void in hopes of rescue. I sent it as a warning, a final, gurgling, cautionary tale from a people who had everything and threw it all away. Keep listening, keep questioning, And for the sake of all future civilizations, don't annoy your local sea god. They have very long memories and a terrible temper. My journey, and the journey of the few broken souls on this ship, continues east, towards a sunrise and a future we cannot imagine. We will carry the memory of Atlantis with us, a heavy, waterlogged piece of baggage for the rest of our days. But the broadcast ends here. The crystal is fading. The story is told. All that is left is the silence and the sea. Keep that subscribe button pressed. Let it be a monument. Let it be a lighthouse that guides others away from the rocks of their own pride. Because even when cities vanish, the legends and the lessons remain. Until the next broadcast, from a very wet island, perhaps, or perhaps from a new shore, or perhaps this is the last you will ever hear from me. Whatever the case, farewell. May your land always be dry. May your leaders be wise, and may you always, always respect the sea. This is Captain Lero, the last chronicler of Atlantis, signing off. The voice cuts out. The static intensifies for a moment, swallowing everything. Then it too fades, leaving only the endless, rhythmic and eternal sound of the waves.